for casting general election ballots. Then we'll go to Senator Huff, 285, election law. Okay. Then we'll go to Senator Simon Ayer, 738. Then we'll come back to the committee chairs bill, 358. Then we'll go to 742, 895, 329, 413, Senator Senator Sidnor, 570, Senator Lamb. Then we'll come back to Senator Reedy's final bill, SJ 8. He has work in the middle of the day in committee. He's got work longer than that, but we want to give him an opportunity to get back to his committee and participate in hearings. The sponsor will present the bill. Their lead sponsor may have up to 5 minutes. Subsequent speakers have up to 2 minutes. There is a clock. Please be respectful of that. We have a number of bills today. We'll try to have maybe 3 come up to the table at once so we can keep a distance, and masks are required in the hearing room. With that, Senator Reedy, welcome to Education, Health, and Environmental Affairs.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good evening, or good afternoon, committee members, and thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm here today. First, you're going to get to spend some time. We're going to spend some time together today, it looks like. But I'm going to present first Senate Bill 532, which deals with proof of identity at polling places in our election law. And Senate Bill 532 is really common sense legislation that would require voter ID, but allow for a number of different types of identification to be used. So it's sort of a proposal that I think can have a lot of support and just really common sense as far as making sure we check identity, but leave plenty of opportunity for people to have different types of identity, forms of identity they can use. Opposition to voter ID is largely based, and I hear often, and I know that may come up in this committee, in the fact that you don't want to have individuals who cannot afford or do not possess a government-issued driver's license or something like that, photo ID. So Senate Bill 532 would actually just expand the definition of voter ID to include things like certainly a driver's license or a state ID card would be included in that, or a passport, but you'd also have a government check, paycheck, bank statement, utility bill, the voter notification card, or the sample ballot that were all mailed by a local board. So there's now 35 states that either request or require ID to vote. And in general, it's my belief, and it's the belief of many that I'm trying to represent today, that it's a good idea to verify someone's identity in order to ensure that we have a one person, one vote per person system, and that people who are voting, everyone that's legally allowed to vote is able to vote, and that we know that they're the person as close as possible is the one voting. And there have been many cases in which people are registered in multiple states and can vote multiple times. There's a lot of cases we've seen where a deceased voter is still on the ballot, and someone can go give their name at the polling place, and there's really no way right now in Maryland that you can check. If somebody gives the name of a person and they're still on the voter rolls, we don't really have a check beyond that person's word that they are indeed that person. So Senate Bill 838 can give voters the confidence that all who vote do so legally. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I would request a favorable vote on Senate Bill 532, and I'm happy to answer any questions at this time.
Okay, excuse me, committee members, there are no other favorables. There's one unfavorable, not a lot of witnesses. There is written testimony. So questions for the good senator, Senator Riley, Vice Chair, and then Senator Ellis, in that order.
Thank you very much, Senator, for bringing this bill forward. Hold on. Here we are.
It's winking at you.
Yeah, I know. Error, I'm sorry. It's just okay. Senator, what states around us have voter ID laws?
I can give you a comprehensive list. I can send that to you. It's 35 total states in the country that have some type of ID laws. Not all of those are required, but many of them are required.
I believe Virginia and Delaware are two of our neighbors that have it.
They have a requirement, yes.
Yeah. Now, in Maryland, when is identification required to be presented, either at a registration, at a voter day, what is circumstances when voter ID is required?
I'm not aware that voter ID is required to cast a ballot in person.
Yeah, check at registration, the original registration. Everybody has to provide it.
At registration, that's true, yes. Sorry, I misunderstood your question. Thank you.
Well, and registration or voter registration now can occur on election day
Correct.
or early voting days. So there is a requirement, but it's not just as broad as some states might have. Is that correct?
There is a requirement to prove identity when you register on the
Right.
form that you submit. Yes, there's not a requirement to provide any sort of ID when you're actually casting a ballot.
Unless you're registering on election day.
I guess, yes, that would be an exception.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Reedy, just clarifying, you said that there are people, deceased names on the ballot, and I just want to clarify that you probably meant deceased names on our voter roll in our e-poll books.
Well, there's probably been a case where a deceased person's been on the ballot, but yes, that's not what I was referring to. Yeah, no, it's,
Just checking for the record
yeah,
for anybody
there are
who's...
deceased people on the voter rolls, and, this isn't your question, but just to say, this isn't even for me, when I talk about those issues, a lot of our election boards, they're doing the best that they can. They're working very hard. So it's not a slap at them. It's just a lot of times the way it works is people have to report that someone died to the Board of Elections. So there's things like that that are out there. So this is the goal of this bill, is partly to address issues like that.
So just to follow up on that comment, are you aware of ERIC, the Electronic Registration Information Center? So Maryland was a founding member of ERIC, and so when people die, it's not incumbent upon the family to notify the Board of Elections, because ERIC also tracks that information, moves out of state and all that, and reports back, which makes it easier for our state and local boards to keep the polls.
I've learned recently
update.
about that, and I think it's great. I will say that as we've been mailing ballots out more and more, there are lots of instances where people have said, my mother-in-law that's been passed away for 5.5 years is getting it. So it still happens. It is good that we have that system. I
There's
agree.
always room for improvement in all of us, right?
Yes.
Thank you, Senator Reedy.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Vice Chair touched on the points I wanted to ask, so thank you.
Seeing no further questions, we will go to there's one opponent that has oral testimony, Samuela Ansa. Please come forward. Your choice.
Okay.
Pick a seat, any seat.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Chair Pinsky and Vice Chair Kagan. My name is Samuela Ansa, and I'm representing Disability Rights Maryland. Disability Rights Maryland is a protection and advocacy agency in Maryland mandated to advance the civil rights of people with disabilities. DRM works to increase opportunities for Marylanders with disabilities to be part of their communities through voting by advocating for equal and equitable access to the ballot. DRM opposes SB 532, which will require an election judge to establish a voter's identity by requiring the voter to present certain proof of identification, such as a government-issued identification card. I'm so sorry, it's really hot. I'm out of breath. Give me one second. Sorry, I was potting on a bottle of water, but voting is a fundamental right guaranteed to every citizen of the United States. However, historically, certain groups have been excluded and disenfranchised from voting through a series of laws, regulations, and practices, such as voter identification laws. Voters of color, women, and voters with disabilities particularly have had their right to vote threatened, removed, or unrealized due to legislation such as SB 532 that place excessive requirements on the voter to prove their identity prior to casting a ballot. Voters with disabilities will bear an undue and unfair burden that threatens their access to voting if voter identification laws are enacted in Maryland. People with disabilities, thank you. People with disabilities are twice as likely to not have a state-issued ID compared to their peers. It is difficult for people with disabilities to obtain identification due to barriers to transportation, the financial cost to replace ID or obtain new ID, in addition to navigating the complex system to replace or obtain new ID. It can be difficult to obtain those documents for those under the care of families, loved ones.
Ms. Ansa, would you take your mask back up, please?
Sorry.
We can hear you.
It can be difficult to obtain those documents for those under the care of families, loved ones, those in facilities or receiving hired care who would have to coordinate to obtain their loved one's ID. Additionally, if a voter is registered to vote, their identity has already been verified. As such, requiring ID at the polling location is extraneous and unnecessary. Currently, voters with disabilities.
Ma'am, you have to start to wrap up. We have a clock.
Okay. Currently, voters with disabilities already face numerous barriers to access the ballot. Requiring ID once a voter reaches the polling location is just an extra barrier that can discourage voters with disabilities from participating in the
And thank
electoral
you.
process. Thank you.
Questions for Ms. Ansa? Yes, Senator Gallion.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We heard in the earlier testimony that there are roughly 35 states that have some sort of voter ID requirement. So my question is, how, the states that do have that, how are they able to handle these issues with the disabilities?
That's a great question. Can I get back to you on that?
Sure. Yep.
Further questions for the witness? Further questions? Seeing none, thank you. Did fine. That completes the hearing on 532. We're going to go to 544. Again, Senator Reedy, casting general election ballot in multiple states. Senator Reedy, please.
Thank you again, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. Senator Reedy, for the record, here to present Senate Bill 544. And I'd like to perhaps have a bit of a bifurcation between the last bill and this one. This bill has been requested by my local board of elections, dealing with a section of the law that I think it's almost a technical fix, if you ask me. So, as amended, Senate Bill 544 would prohibit a person from willfully and knowingly casting a ballot in the general election of more than one state. A person who violates that prohibition is guilty of a misdemeanor and subject to a fine of up to $5,000 and/or imprisonment for up to 5 years. Requested by the, again, knowingly and willfully has to be a part of that process. It was requested, as I said, by the Carroll County Board of Elections, and it's based on a 2018 case where it was discovered that in my district, a Westminster, Maryland man had voted 9 times in both Maryland and West Virginia in their general elections beginning in 2006. So Mr. Hartman was prosecuted in West Virginia and sentenced to 30 days in jail, 1 year of probation, and had to pay a fine. Mr. Hartman should have been charged in Maryland, in my view, and in the view of our Board of Elections, and was not. And so this is just adding voting in 2 states, knowingly and willfully knowingly voting in 2 states, to the list of voting violations already listed in the election law article. So again, as I see it, it's a bit of an oversight in the law, and I just would request a favorable report, and again, happy to answer any questions.
Questions for the good Senator, Vice Chair?
Thank you, Senator Reedy. I am in the bill, page 2, lines 1 and 2, which is the bill. It says willfully and knowingly, as you said, and I'm going to read the whole thing, cast a ballot in the general election in more than one state in the same year. So let's use an example of a constituent of mine who lives in Gaithersburg, votes in the primary election in June, and then moves with her family to another state and votes in another state in November. This bill would disenfranchise that constituent of mine from legally voting in both states.
I wonder if you got the unamended version possibly?
I'm in the system.
It says cast, because what I have is it cast a ballot in a general election in
Yes.
more than one state.
Oh, it does say that. Sorry. I
Well, we
read
had a little
that.
bit of a drafting issue early on to be sure we were clear, because you were
Yeah.
right. We don't want somebody to get in trouble for voting in a primary in one state and a general in another.
And a special general election, I guess, wouldn't really be covered by that. I apologize. I
That's
read
okay.
it, and I read it too quickly, I guess.
That's okay, no problem.
Okay, thank you, Senator. Sorry. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Further questions for Senator Ellis?
Thank you, Senator Reedy. So besides that one incident, any other incidents of folks who might have voted in multiple states in
Not that I'm
One,
aware of in
two,
my
one, two,
county.
yeah.
We did have, there was a case a few years ago of, in fact, it was a candidate for Congress that voted in multiple states in a general election and was prosecuted, but again, I think they can only be prosecuted in the other state. I don't know of however many others. But that's why I said it's kind of a technical fix, because it's the section of the law where we talk about those kinds of intentional fraudulent types of activity.
Yeah, I mean, we're not talking about Congress people, because I don't want to quote Mark Twain here, but anyway, but regular citizens.
Well, it was a person, it was a citizen that did it. That
Regular folks, yeah. But you can't think of any other.
Well, I don't have them in front of me. No, there have been
Yeah.
some. I'm sure, I don't know that it's thousands of people, but it has happened a few times.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. I know they didn't sign up, but Mr. Damaris, can you come to the mic for a minute? If you gain knowledge of a situation happening where they voted in West Virginia and Maryland, can you handle it? How do you handle it? Enlighten us a little bit.
Sure, I guess.
Yeah.
For the folks in the audience, Mr. Damaris is the executive director?
No.
Director of Candidacy. I was going to do it for the
Introduce
record.
yourself and let them all know why we're
Sure.
asking you in particular.
Thank
Sure.
you, Senator.
Yeah, sure.
Jared Demarinis, Director of Candidacy and Campaign Finance for the Maryland State Board of Elections. Also, happy to be back. I just wanted to say, it's nice seeing you now all in person. I've been seeing you virtually now for over a year and a half, so it's great to be here and stuff. Oh, sorry, yes.
Into the mic, please.
There we go. So yes, as the senator mentioned, we did have that one case with a congressional candidate that voted in multiple elections at that point there. When we do see these cases, they're rare and infrequent, I just want to put it that way. But we do notify the state prosecutor's office, and they would then notify the other state that's in question. And basically, at that point there is a determination as to which law would probably be best applicable for enforcement between the two. Like the senator said, this is just a general, a little fix here to allow us, I think, greater flexibility in prosecuting those cases. And it's important, as the senator mentioned, with the idea that it does not refer to the primary, because for, presidential, you can literally be moving from state to state and voting in multiple primary elections and still casting legal ballots. So that's why you can only vote in one general election. And so, yes, this would just be the normal case.
But again, is there a statute now in Maryland law that would allow you to proceed? Understanding there's one in West Virginia, for example, is there, yeah.
So I would say that it would be the current four, which was to vote in an election district or precinct without the legal authority to vote in that election precinct, the one that's underneath it. But and that's where I would say you would have to make some sort of determination, a legal fact-finding, an investigation to see, if this person was actually, say, a Maryland resident that voted impermissibly in West Virginia then, or if this person was a West Virginia resident that voted impermissibly in Maryland. But yes, that's kind of where I think that's the current one, because they wouldn't, in one place, they would not have the legal authority to vote that ballot. And that would be a part of the investigation.
Senator Ellis.
So, Mr. Damaris, good to see you in person also. And when I heard your voice, I was looking at the screen.
Exactly, right.
But, quick question. So, did your department come in favorable with this bill?
No, we're just here for informational purposes only, and always happy to answer those questions. And
So, do you, in your opinion, do you think this will enhance your ability at the board to enforce the voter laws, this bill?
Well, I don't want to speak for the board or anyone on that front there. I think that this would be a tool that the state prosecutor can use in clarifying some of those determinations.
So a useful tool.
I would say yes. It's definitely something that clarifies a little bit more than the current one there, but at the same token, we do have that law that talks about legal authority on the books.
And that's as far as I can push you to.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Damaris.
Sure. Thank you.
There's other written testimony, but none oral. Senator Reedy will call you back in a
See you
bit.
in a little while, yeah.
Thank you. Okay. We're going to move to Senator Huff. That is Senate Bill 285, campaign signs prohibitions. Welcome, Senator Huff.
Yeah, thank you very much. This is a simple bill. You all heard it last year. Basically, right now, if you steal or deface, destroy somebody's campaign yard sign or campaign signage, it's actually treated as the lowest penalty you can about treat it, because it's based on the dollar amount. And the dollar amount, it's $100, less than $100. So the maximum penalty is only $500. And any of you know, I always ask questions on the floor whenever we raise penalties to make sure it's warranted. Well, I don't know how your counties are, but I know all throughout my area, this last election, we just had way more instances of signs being destroyed, vandalized, than I've ever seen before. And part of it speaks to our politics, that things are more heated, more divided than they've been in the past. So I believe that when some sort of criminal activity is out of control, and in this case, it's really a First Amendment. You're really depriving someone of their First Amendment right to support a candidate of their choosing. So it's, in ways, it's much worse than going onto somebody's property and kicking over a flower pot or, or destroying property, because you're actually depriving them of their First Amendment right. So in those certain instances, I think it's warranted that we not just look at the value of the property, but look at actually what you're doing. So I think all this bill does is take the penalty from $500 to $1,000. That's it. Doesn't change the jailable offense, whatever. I think it's important going election year that we have that deterrent there. A lot of states do this already. I modeled it after looking at what other states did. And I'll just give you an anecdote about it. I won't bore you. I know you got a long day here, so do we. But we got stories from Carroll County, Montgomery County, Washington County, all throughout the state where they had problems in the presidential year. And my county is very divided. We're about a 50-50 county. I'm not sure how much a problem is in everybody else's counties or jurisdictions, but I heard a lot from Republicans about, my Trump signs were taken. We had a lady last year, her Trump flag was taken off her house and burned on fire and all this. So I put the bill in, and I had my meeting with the Sierra Club, and they said, we love this bill, because most of the Sierra Club people, they live in the rural part, the very red parts of Frederick County, and they said all of our Jamie Raskin signs were stolen and broken and trashed. Like, we love this bill. So last year, you may remember, I had a person who was a Trump supporter and a Jamie Raskin supporter for my county, because it happened across the board, and it's not just even political signage, too. You can run into people that have, signage out supporting causes and things like that you see constantly. So I just think that we're heading into another election year. I think it's important that we do a deterrent here. Look, as candidates, it makes us mad, but actually it makes you madder for the voter, because it's their First Amendment right. It's their right to support somebody. We had a couple stolen from us, and it just irks them, because that's our right. Our founding fathers fought for us to have a democracy, to be able to express our opinions, and people shouldn't feel like it's their right to go on your property and deprive you of your opinion, whether I agree with it or not. So that's the bill.
I don't see any lights.
Me.
I'm sorry. Oh,
Me.
your hand was in front of the light.
Sorry.
Senator Kagan, followed by Senator Ellis.
Senator Huff, you and I have talked about this bill. I love this bill because it irks the crap out of me when people mess with signs. I don't touch, look at, knock over, take, even after Election Day. I think it's an outrage, and people should be able to display the signs of their choice. You said that this bill would take it from $500 to $1,000 for the fine, but what you didn't mention is that it says, or imprisonment for not more than 90 days, or both. So can you just talk about current law in terms of imprisonment and what your thoughts are
Yeah,
about
so
that?
the current law right now is 60 days. So it's a misdemeanor, so currently it's 500 or up to 60 days. I didn't change the imprisonment time. It just changes it from 1,000 up to, from 500.
What I'm looking at does indeed change it from 60 days. It says 90 days. It says $1,000. It says to a fine of not more than $1,000 or imprisonment
Oh, I'm
for not
sorry.
more than
Yeah,
90
I'm
days
sorry. I'm looking
or
at
both.
the first provision of this. So you're right. So the first provision is 60 days. So the second one goes to 90. I don't really have a strong feeling that one way or the other. If the committee wants to move it up to 90, they can. No one's going to get jail time for this. They're going to get the fine. So the 500 to 1,000 is the more important part.
Okay. Thank you, Senator. Thanks for the bill.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, thank you for this bill. Can we make it retroactive to 2018? because my signs were hit knocked down continually, but this is not personal. We're in 2022 now. So there were statutes on the books back then.
Yeah.
I called the sheriff's office, they come out, took a report, did nothing. So what kind of enforcement will we have with this? So will this be another issue for the state prosecutor, like so many election law stuff?
Yeah, unfortunately, I mean, it's still going to be the same enforcement, but what I'm trying to do is, I'm trying to do what other states have done, where they've set it apart, and we're at least adding a little bit more of a punishment, because we're trying to come up with a deterrence. Unfortunately, as lawmakers, all we can do is change the law. We can't, make the police enforce it or go after it, but I at least hope from our side that we can say and take a stand that as things are more divided now than they've probably ever been in the past. I mean, the fact that people lit things on fire and spray painted stuff, I mean, it's really out of control what I see driving around. And I think there needs to be, at least from our side, the lawmaker side, of increasing the penalties to say this is not okay. And we can, reflect that down to our law enforcement too, so they can prioritize it more in election year. Because I think they look at it like, they're treating it like a property crime now, an annoyance. But I think we need to look at it more like our constituents' constitutional rights are being infringed.
Yeah, so you were looking at, this is a big problem statewide. And so if it's a elections violation, if it could be proven that, say, it's a coordinated.
Oh, you mean one candidate doing it against the other?
Exactly, coordinated. Should it be something that we turn over to the Board of Elections and the state prosecutor, since we have increased jurisdiction there? That's a serious question to you.
Yeah.
If you ever, I don't know if you've thought about that.
I haven't, and to be honest, that's kind of more you-all's realm. I mean, I know the criminal side and that part of it. I certainly open to suggestions of if there's a way. I mean, you guys have the expertise as far as state board and prosecutor and all that stuff. We don't really do as much of that on JPR, but if there's a way to tackle it from that, I'm all for it.
Yeah, I just wanted your opinion.
Yeah, and some of these, it's a great point. In some of these small elections, if you're running for some county office there, or some city council, your whole campaign may be just having some signs. So if somebody steals them, I mean, that really deprives your ability to get elected.
Thank you.
Much, Mr. Chairman. And my situation was a little different. My Republican opponent, I'm a Republican, went out in one night with teams of 5 different teams and took down 32 of our big signs. The total value was about $5,000. But the bill doesn't address catching them and prosecuting them because it was in the middle of the night. Nobody noticed. So that aspect of your bill doesn't change current law. But I think $1,000 in my case might have been a little light, and it would have been the cost of doing business. I would have liked to see it much higher. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah.
Well, along the same lines, Senator Riley, if a local police department, state's attorney's office, either are unable to find the culprits or they don't pursue it, I'm not sure if $500 or $1,000 is going to matter. And I guess my question, have you ever been able to either have enough people who notice someone doing it to get the local police department, state's attorney to try to prosecute somebody? I mean, has anybody ever been prosecuted, even if it's Look, I
Yeah.
think if they're made to pay $500, I think that's going to be as much dissuasive for doing it again as $1,000. So again, I think it does get back to enforcement, and sometimes it is hard. I mean, I know there was an example in Baltimore County in 2018 where it was caught on video. Someone happened to be coming by.
Yeah.
So I just don't know, back to Senator Riley, if there's been any enforcement at all, if they've ever caught someone and they just couldn't convict them. Do you know?
Yeah, I do know, because we had one, somebody did it into my house. I mean, we've got the cameras now, and the one on the doorbell and all that. They destroyed some other stuff, but the sign was one thing, but we turned it over to the police and they got prosecuted. So I know in my area, when we had the video evidence and we showed it to them, they did prosecute the person. So I would just say that I look at it from my view, if there's a problem and it's getting worse and worse, obviously the current penalties are not working, so we need to look at increasing them. And I think actually, like I said, because of the Ring cameras and the cameras in front of the house, it's much easier to go after these people, just like the people that steal the packages from the front door and all that. Technology is actually making it easier to do it. And I know people, they get enough stolen, they get lights up there, or they like hide in the bushes. People get very adamant about these things, so.
Thank you for joining us, and thank you for your legislation.
Yeah, thank you.
That concludes that hearing. Senator Simon Ayer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For the record, Senator Brian Simon Ayer here for Senate Bill 738. And out of respect for the committee, I did not ask people to come and testify for this in person. We've had a debate on the floor with a conceptual idea of that. It was a couple lines in amendment. This is actually 4 pages long that gives the details. As we've noted, there's been a dramatic shift in the way we vote these days. We use mail-in ballots much more. I think there's been over a 60% increase. And our system was never designed to handle that. The Board of Election Statistics confirmed that they are not looking for fraud with mail-in signatures. And I understand that elections is a very charged issue, both on Democrat and Republican sides. So let me just give a little analogy to kind of take it out of that high-charged area. Say someone was going to set up a savings account at a bank. They go in, they register, they sign, they show ID, and the bank says, we've got a new ATM system that we're starting to implement. And we're going to send you a withdrawal slip, and we're going to put a barcode on with all your information on it, and we're going to send it out to your house. And we know it's against the law to steal money from people. So what we're going to do with the ATM, we're going to take the pin away. You don't have to put a pin in. We're going to take the security camera away because we know it's against the law to steal. Well, someone comes up and sees this withdrawal in the mail, whether it was his old address or they saw it in the mailbox, they got a hold of it. And all they have to do is just sign it. No verification it's them. They go to the ATM, no pin, no camera, stick in the withdrawal slip. It reads the barcode, sees somebody put some mark in there for a signature, and they give them the money. The person who actually set up the account comes back and tries to get their money, and it's all gone. So they go to the bank and they say, what happened? They said, well, somebody came in with the proper withdrawal slip, had your information on it, they signed it, we gave them the money. Now, nobody in their right mind would institute something like that in the financial system. It would be absurd. That's what we're doing in our election system with mail-in ballots. And everybody thinks that's fine. Well, some people think it's fine.
Ladies and gentlemen, let's refrain from applause, please. Please.
Thank you. So in the mail-in system, which we have, people have to go register to vote. They sign it. They provide their ID. Then the Board of Election now has come up with a new system that we approved with a mail-in ballot that says we're going to send a ballot out. It's going to have a barcode scan on there with all your information. And we know it's against the law to have perjury. So we're just going to have them sign it. We're not going to check if it's their name or if anything on there. Just have to sign it. They come, they drop their ballot off. The Board of Elections says, is it signed? Yeah, it's signed. Count it. Then guess what? The person comes in person voting, and they said, here I am. I got my ID. I got whatever you need to show. I'm the person. I'm sorry, you already voted. They said, I've never voted. Well, we've got a ballot that has a signature on it. Your vote is rejected. And that's what we're trying to fix. Again, it's not trying to be Democrat or Republican. It's just trying to have security in our system. And I'm flexible on the security method, but I sincerely don't understand why we don't want to have security in an area that has known flaw in it. So I'm not going to belabor the bill because we've discussed a lot of the concepts, but I'll just say basically what it does. It performs a sample audit of mail-in ballots received by jurisdiction. A bipartisan signature verification group will look at the sample ballots. If the number of rejected ballots meets a threshold, Then the remaining ballots after that will be audited as well. Now, to ensure everybody gets to have their vote casted, there is a curing method in here. So if your signature when you were 17 is different than you are today, you get to cure it. They reach out to you. If they can't get contact with you, or if you don't give them a signature, then the ballot is rejected. And then there's some reporting and posting online with the information. That's basically the bill. Now, in closing, I read the League of Women's Voters information letter. And it says, we strongly recommend establishing a work group to study signature verification for mail-in ballots. Such a work group should include bipartisan members of the legislature, selected staff, Board of Election members, advocates of the disabled, minority populations, and appropriate participation. So with that in mind, and based on the debate we had on the floor, this bill probably is not in the form that this committee would take. I'm going to work with the stakeholders in a bipartisan manner. We're going to amend this bill to be a work group to do just as they said. And in closing, without getting into the debate, the fact is that many are questioning the integrity of our election systems for one reason or another. Last election, you heard it from Republicans. This upcoming election, you're hearing it from Democrats. They're concerned. If we can help provide confidence in our election system when it is in doubt, why would we not want to? And with that, I would ask for favorable consideration as I told, as far as it goes amended. Thank you.
I want to ask you to leave, but we don't do like who's got the loudest applause, so just leave it at the door if you would. You know, if you like the ideas, you shake your head and that's great, but we're not doing applause. Questions for the good senator? Senator Carrozza.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Senator Simoner, thank you for this bill. I, too, have heard from my constituents, and part of it was, I think, just a disbelief that a signature wouldn't be checked. That they look at this when they vote, whether you vote in person or by mail, it's sacred. And they expect to have integrity. It seems to me what you're proposing, and my question is, it seems like it's the most minimum of safeguards that we do this in other areas. So I wanted to ask you, in those, with the audit, with, trying to check this, what, in those other, did you look at other areas? Because I look at this is just a minimum safeguard. Did we look at some other ways to strengthen that safeguard?
Well, thank you for the question. I think, some people call it low-hanging fruit. I think you have to go where the biggest problem is first. This is a very easy way for people to commit fraud or entice them to do it. And we have fraud in every area of life. Election is not just unique that nobody would commit fraud, especially with the passions that you see. Again, I'm not up here saying there was widespread fraud in Maryland and all that, but if you're not looking, you're not going to find it. And I think we should have just the base amount in here. And quite frankly, if these minimal audits, because I was trying to get a balance between not overloading the Board of Elections and also having some confidence in our election. If these come back and say, look, we've done it, this minimum, and there's no fraud, or maybe one out of, a million or so, that would give us great cause to say, our system's secure. But if it comes back and this jurisdiction or this jurisdiction, you're having hundreds or thousands show up, then I think we should come back and put stricter security in place. But, it is what it is, and, you know how the legislature works. So I thought this was a balanced approach, that we could not overload the system, but also have some sense of confidence. So it's a starting point.
With the minimal. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for this bill, Senator Simoner. So it was a big change for Maryland going to this, mass mail-in balloting in this most recent election. There's a lot of, there's different states, especially out west, that have been doing this for a long time. My question to you is, did you kind of look at those states and see like how many do the signature verification, how many do not? If we're looking at this in Maryland, you can look at other states that have been doing it a long time and should have it perfected by now. So can you just enlighten us on that?
Thank you for your question. I'll do this briefly. Again, I am truly coming from this not as a Republican or looking at it as a Democrat issue. And when I looked at other states, more than half the states in America do some form of signature verification. And they're not all Republican. A lot of them are Democrat states like California, Washington State, Oregon, New York, New Jersey, Illinois, Massachusetts, which I believe, if you ask people here on this committee or in the Senate, would believe that they're not trying to disenfranchise their voters.
Right. Senator, I think the question was about the 5 states that have had mail-in ballot for some number of election cycles.
Yeah, I believe Washington State.
At Colorado, there are 4 or 5. I think, as I heard Senator Gallion, it wasn't about the 26 states, it was about the 5 states.
So some of them, the states I did mention, have mail-in, like Washington State. And they're not finding widespread fraud. They are finding fraud, but it's also a deterrent. People know if they're checking. For example, out in Washington State, a mother got caught saying, my daughter away at college, I'm sure she would have voted this way. I'm going to send it in for her. And she signed her name, and they said, whoop, that's not your signature. And they worked it out. But that's the kind, it also provides a deterrence.
But the ones that have been doing the mass mail-in for a long time, do most of them have some sort of signature verification process?
I know some of them do. I don't have the complete list in front of me.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Simon, I see the title for this bill, Secure Elections Act of 2022, and I just kind of, wondering what state I'm in. And so the thing is, ever since I've been in Annapolis as an elected official, I hear and I've seen how, we say and we actually act where, Democrats and Republicans get along, we work together. Well, this is not Washington, D.C. We don't bring that stuff here. And I've seen we work together really well. We have a very capable Republican governor. And so we work along and resolve a lot of issues. And then just looking at this title and listening to your testimony, you brought in, you never mentioned problem in Maryland. You talk about Washington State, you talk about other places. And so, in my opinion, I guess I'm seeing something, or you're seeing something I'm not seeing. What problems do we have in Maryland that would require this bill to be passed when we all know of the nonsense that happened in other states like Arizona? They went and this Republican legislature did an audit thinking they'll find non-secure and fraud in that election. That auditor hired by the Republican legislator in Arizona came back and said we saw no fraud, no problem at all. And so even that rhetoric is just total nonsense in that particular instance where Republicans did an audit of the Maricopa County elections which is Maricopa County is around Phoenix. And the Republican auditor said we saw no problems and they folded and quietly went away. And so here we see this big bill, Secure Elections Act of 2022, and this is Maryland now. This is Maryland. This is not for Washington, D.C. So my question is, what is the need in Maryland for this bill when there is absolutely no insecurity in the election system that I've kind of heard of ever voted in Maryland?
Well, thank you, Senator Ellis. You always cut to the chase, and I appreciate that with you, sincerely. You say, we mentioned something, Washington State, because a question came up that they caught some fraud. The problem here in Maryland is you're not seeing any fraud because you're not looking. So I could go to next election, and I could sign, if I get a ballot, I could sign your name on it. And the Board of Election would not check that. Matter of fact, I got their statistics. In the last 2-3 elections, there was millions of absentee ballots. And they rejected some of those because they didn't have a signature, but they didn't reject a single ballot because somebody saw it in the wrong name, they put a squiggle. And if you're not looking for it, you're never going to find it. And that's the problem. So in Washington State, they found it because they had the process in place. You don't see it in Maryland because you're not looking. And that gives pause to people saying, is our election secure? And we have a way to remedy that. And that should be our duty as representatives. So if you're not looking for it, you're never going to find it.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying, you're not looking. So my example of Maricopa County, Phoenix area, Arizona, they looked. I mean, they had ultraviolet lights, they had all kind of different wacky techniques trying to find stuff that didn't exist, and spent a lot of taxpayers' money, a lot of time, a lot of press time, and then when they found absolutely nothing, they quietly went away. So with all our issues in Maryland, with all the needs for precious state dollars to solve so many of our problems, why would we go searching for a problem that none of us have really identified? And believe me, as an elected official, I looked because I was watching. I went when they were counting the votes. I went to the Board of Elections, and we all have that capability of citizens as candidates. And there are folks who are watching. I can tell you, I watch. And so, you know, of course, to say no one is looking for anything, I don't think that applies to a lot of folks I know. So I'm just wondering, why would we spend so much money and time to find a problem that no one is saying exists? Nationally, yes, the former president, it's loudly, you know, but those conspiracy theories have been thrown away a lot. And so we're trying to nationalize, with looking at the, this bill title here. And so I'm just curious, why would you, believe me, I would love to vote for this bill. I need you to
We'll
tell me
give you an opportunity.
there's a problem that exists. And so if you can't
So
tell me.
the main thing is, the system was never designed to handle millions of absentee ballots. It was thousands. We've changed our system to give access, and we want to give access to people who can vote. I'm 100% in agreement with that.
Okay.
But in the process, just to look at one side of the equation and say, let's give them more access, when there's no checks and balances on the other side, is not appropriate. So this is not looking at the national, this is looking at Maryland, where we've overhauled our mail-in process system as far as access, but we're for some reason saying we don't have to look at the security side of it.
Okay.
And that's just, could be a difference of opinion on that.
Okay, I understand.
Let's leave it at that.
Am I done with that?
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Okay, that concludes the hearing on the good senator's bill, 738. We will go to the chairman's bill, and let me just mention, the state policy is for people to wear a mask over their mouth and their nose. I know some people aren't comfortable with that, but that's the policy the state legislature is following, so I hope everyone will also follow that in this room. Okay, we're going to go to 358. I'm going to do it from up here. I will not take long. Senate Bill 358 is Public Financing Act, which the committee is fairly familiar with. Over the last 10 years or 12 years, numerous jurisdictions, Montgomery County, Howard County, Baltimore County, and soon Baltimore City, I believe, have adopted public financing. It is voluntary. The Supreme Court in Buckley v. Vallejo said you can't require it. I actually introduced this many years ago and gave the option for local jurisdictions to adopt a system, which subsequently has happened. I would like to circle back and eventually have it for the state senators and state delegates. We have it for the governor. We've had at least 2, 3, 4, and five candidates. Governor Hogan during his first term, I think, did Sauerbray? Candidate Sauerbray, then candidate Madaleno, and this year, and candidate Mazier, and now candidate Baker. So we have a large number of people who are using the governor and lieutenant governor who don't want to ask private deep pockets and spend all their time on the phone, Public financing says if you can show a threshold of small donations from Joe and Mary Citizen, $10, $15, $20, there will be a match. Again, it's voluntary. If you think you need to raise a lot of money, don't want to be constrained, you can do that. But if you don't want to spend all your time dialing for dollars and rely on the public, you can get these small donations to give you enough money to run for office. I think it's been used enough in the gubernatorial race. We reauthorized it last year and added money to it. The governor approved that money. It is taking off across the jurisdictions. And whether this is the year, or next year is the year, I do believe some point we have to practice what we preach and give the opportunity to regular citizens who don't have access to people with deep pockets who can write a $2,000 or $4,000 or $5,000 check, who can do it on $5 and $10 and $15. I always talk about the community organizer in West Baltimore or in Wheaton who might not hang out with people of the upper class or the top 1 or 2 or 5%. They should have an opportunity to run for office, and public financing would allow that. Maine has had it for 20 years, I believe. Arizona has had it for close to 20 years. And I believe they have shown it has actually contributed to diversity in the people who get elected. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time. You've heard it before. I haven't approached each of you to ask for your vote. I know there's a long queue trying to seek funding during this year where there's apparently a bit of a surplus. I'm not trying to do that this year and get in line. As has been said by the vice chair, this is maybe not to begin, but to continue a conversation. And one of these years, hopefully in the next couple of years, we'll take it seriously, we'll get the money, we'll pass it into law. So we also, if we don't want to choose to raise that kind of money, we can do it and still be competitive. With that, let's hear from the two favorables, and then we'll take questions. I have Emily Scarr and Morgan Drayton, Mary Perg and Common Cause. There's a lot of written testimony, but there are only the two witnesses I mentioned, and actually, no one has written in opposition. Ms. Scarr, you want to start, or Ms. Drayton?
How you doing? Go, or you
Afternoon. Good afternoon, Chair Pinsky, Vice Chair Kagan, and members of the committee. My name is Morgan Drayton.
Ms. Drayton, pull the mic closer, lean into it. You know, this is being streamed, so we want people to be able to hear all of the testimony.
Sure. My name is Morgan Drayton, Policy and Engagement Manager for Common Cause Maryland, and I'm so grateful to be here for the opportunity to provide testimony in favor of SB 358. Since the disastrous Citizens United decision and its progeny, America's elections have become deluged with outside spending. Wealthy interests have driven up the cost to compete in elections at every level, effectively boxing out candidates who might not have access to wealthy benefactors, but who do have broad support in their own communities. Marylanders should be concerned with this rise in candidate fundraising totals. When the cost to run for office is high, candidates often need to rely on mega donors or corporate interests to be competitive. SB 358 would help amplify the voices of regular Marylanders, giving the candidates they support the ability to compete with candidates backed by big money interests. And because SB 358 will significantly amplify these voices of regular Marylanders to compete with big money spending, we ask the committee for a favorable report. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Drayton. Ms. Scarr.
My name is Emily Scarr. I'm the director of Maryland PIRG, the State Public Interest Research Group. I want to, here in support of SB 358, I want to thank Senator Pinsky for continuing the fight on this bill, and to the entire committee for your work on supporting small donor public financing for the gubernatorial elections. I do hope that in the next term, hopefully the next year, we can move forward with expanding our state's public financing system to the Maryland General Assembly. I know that the biggest concern is often cost. It doesn't come for free. Nothing about running our elections comes for free. But this investment in our democracy is critical for building faith in government and ensuring our elections are funded by the people of Maryland, not just wealthy interests, corporations, or out-of-state donors. We pay for our poll workers, we pay for cybersecurity technology. It makes sense that we make this investment as well. Maryland PIRG research has found that these programs can double the number of local donors in a campaign while driving down the average cost of donations. You can see a link to some of our research in your written testimony. And then there's also just tremendous political support across the political spectrum for taking on the role of wealthy donors in our elections. A 2018 survey found that 88% of Americans want to reduce the influence of large campaign donors across the political spectrum. So we respectfully request a favorable report. Thank you.
Thank you. Before I entertain questions, among those testifying in favor is the Baltimore County government and the Office of the Attorney General. I think I had Senator Carrozza, and then I had the Vice Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And is it Ms. Scar?
Yes.
So I understand your testimony in support of the public financing for state senators and House of Delegates. The concern that I have on the way maybe the bill's been presented, just in general, is that, you know, those who choose not to do public financing are somehow, you know, that they're in, quote, the pockets of, you know, deep pockets, or the pocket of these high donors. And what concerns me about the bill is that when you do public financing, there's then little incentive to do what many of us do in grassroots. You know, we go to our farmers, our watermen, our small business operators, and, you know, it shows that we're out there building support, not taking the public finance money so, you know, I can run for office. So you know, my concern, and I guess, you know, you seem to, are you prioritizing this public money, that taxpayer dollars, to go, you know, to the support of these candidates who, you know, I think the general public may believe you need to go out and earn that support.
It's actually quite the opposite, so I appreciate your question. Older models of public financing were more of a grant system, right? We want everyone to be able to run for office, so here's some money, go run for office. These small donor public financing systems are based on incentivizing exactly what you're talking about. So in order to qualify, you have to meet some really aggressive thresholds to prove that you have community support. So you have to reach a pretty high level of small donors from your district, from your county or district, and raise a certain threshold of money. It just all has to be small donations under $250 in order to even be eligible for the funds. And then the funds you receive are based on those donations. So it's a matching fund, not a lump sum, but for every $25 you get, every new donor in your district, you get matching funds so you can still run a competitive race around a traditionally funded candidate. So we are incentivizing candidates to be spending more time knocking on doors, talking to small business owners, talking to farmers, and less time courting those who can afford just the big checks in their district or out of their district. Does that make sense?
I understand your response, and I guess, and maybe it's just a fundamental difference in approach, that these are taxpayer dollars.
Absolutely.
That, you know, are going to these candidates when, given we're coming out of a pandemic and we have long-term recovery needs, not only on the health side, economic side, social side, that this would be you know, that this would be brought forth, you know, for the use of these taxpayer dollars for this purpose.
Yeah, I think as a taxpayer, I would love my money to go to ensure that candidates can run for office without having to accept checks from corporations or out-of-state donors. In no way do I mean to imply that candidates who do are in some way corrupt. I think the system is actually better for voters and for candidates by providing that alternative. But we don't have to agree.
Right, and I think it's a matter of priorities. Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for this bill. I'm proud to be a co-sponsor. I have two questions for you as the chair, but Ms. Drayton and Ms. Scar, if you wanted to weigh in also. For the Senate, you have to get I'm waiting since the question is for you. Sorry. No, that's okay. To get the match to run for the Senate, you need 250 donations for total, at least, minimum, for a total of 15,000. The House, 150 for up to 75, minimum 7,500. I'm wondering if you considered sub-districts, because if the new maps continue to have those, this has at-large districts, and so I wondered about that, if you could speak to that. And second, the Attorney General doesn't seem to be in here, and I wonder if you thought about including the Attorney General. Thank you.
To the last question first, it was suggested last year when we had the bill to extend the public finance for the governor. And again, Governor Hogan used it a number of years ago, 7.5 years ago, and I believe he let the funding for this coming year go through to allow it to be fully funded. So he has no problem with the priorities of public funding.
And that was after it had been depleted.
Right, correct.
Okay, to be clear.
Last year, we discussed other statewide offices, Attorney General, Comptroller, et cetera. We were selective. We wanted to keep the governor going. Yes, it cost $5 million. We didn't want to break the bank, so I would love eventually to include all those people.
Okay.
And in terms of sub-districts, if this bill starts to move, I'm more than happy to take care of that.
Yeah, I would just add, obviously, it's important to have at all levels of office, statewide. I think we're already looking at the governor's race and how much money is flooding into Maryland from out of state. That's a really good reason to look at the top ticket that costs that much money and where the money's coming from. But it's also really important to look at these local races, these state delegate races, because that's when people are just getting their start. And we want to make sure our people can run for office who don't have access to personal wealth or large donors.
Senator Ellis.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And so I'm looking at this bill and I'm reflecting back to my childhood where I was a member of a church. And every year we had an annual campaign where we had to go and knock on our neighbors' doors and to get them to contribute for worldwide missions. And I remember I felt so bad because I would go into a lot of neighborhoods and folks would kind of like, they feel good, they want to contribute, they would give like, a quarter, and they will search for that quarter. And I'm thinking, with this public financing bill, what mechanism would be in there to say that you have a candidate in a community like that is so, low income, and you're trying to raise the money from your neighbors to get these matching funds. And with the high cost of everything now, inflation is like crazy, gasoline, electric bill, everything, just food is so high. A lot of these communities, if a candidate wanted to run in one of these communities as a delegate or a single member district, to get folks in that neighborhood, my brain is going back to my childhood experience as far as where people will struggle just kind of with a quarter. And so I'm like, would this disenfranchise that candidate who seeks to really represent that community that really don't have any extra to contribute? How would that candidate fit into this overarching scheme if they cannot reach the minimum from each member or each contributor or each neighbor to contribute to get the money? Because I noticed that in the fiscal note it talks about almost $40 million, but it seems like those candidates in some of these marginalized communities wouldn't be able to even access this fund because of the access to capital for their neighbors is so limited.
Let me answer that. Let's put this bill aside for now. Let's look at the status quo. And I would contend with the cost of campaigns reaching 100,000 and 200,000, a lot of people are deciding who can I hit up for up to $6,000. And if they can get 6 people to give $4,000 to $6,000, they're legitimate before you start. And I would contend currently most campaigns are not run on $5 and $8 contributions. And I would also go further that I think there's a tendency that there's greater access for someone who gave $5,000 than there is for someone who gave $3. So I think the status quo puts that dynamic in the most exacerbated way, Senator Ellis, and I think right now the status quo, I think we have the voiceless and the voices. And I think when people don't contribute, of course they vote, of course we have volunteers who knock on doors, but I think there's an outsized weight to those people who give significant contributions. That's number one. Number two, when you go to knock on a door and ask for $5 or $8 or $10, and people believe in you, and you've been a leader in their community, fighting for justice, housing, organizing around housing, or whatever it is, I think there's a greater likelihood that people will give $5 or $10 to you, and it will actually increase what I call the local community activists who are fighting the struggle every day in their neighborhood, poor neighborhoods in some cases, who absolutely don't have an opportunity to run for office. So this is not perfect. It's far from perfect. But I think it actually encourages you to knock on doors, to see if someone will support your efforts, and you've gained their trust through other organizing, civic, Boys and Girls Club, whatever it is, in the church, synagogue, et cetera, that it's more likely that those people are empowered by giving $3 or $6 or $8 than if, in the traditional system, a lot of people not only feel irrelevant, don't give money, they don't vote. And I believe if someone gives you $5 to support your campaign, I think they're more likely to vote than a lot of other people. So I just think my assessment is it'll actually help the voiceless be involved in politics, not exclude them.
And Senator Ellis, a similar discussion happened a lot in DC where they set up this program when I was working with them 5-6 years ago. And there's been some research on both DC and New York City on how it works. Likewise, in Baltimore City, Councilman Burnett, who represents the west side of Baltimore, one of our lower income communities, when he ran for office the first time, he was collecting $8 from folks, $8 for District 8. And so, while, as Senator Pinsky said, this is not a silver bullet and doesn't deal with the other inequities between districts, I certainly think it's a better alternative, so where he can take on, his first year for office, he ran against someone who is independently wealthy, or if he doesn't have a matching fund, he's forced to seek donors out of districts to help fill those campaign finance gaps. Whereas now he can go back, get $8 for 8 and get that match with the public fund and not have to look for other sources and spend all of his time in his district, in his community, and still run a competitive race.
Okay, so you're saying there are some gaps that have been studied where folks in the districts who might be much lower income might have issues. So are
No,
they?
the opposite. It's looked at the way that it works, like the way that it works to shift the donor class. And so in DC and in Baltimore City, we did research to find that on average, donors in Baltimore City elections are white men over the age of 6. I don't remember exactly. It's a DMOS report I can share with you, which is not representative of Baltimore City's demographics. But once you establish public financing, who is donating to elections, the percentage of people who are from the city, the percentage of people who are black, the percentage of people who are women, the percentage of people who are young, shifts more in line with what the community is more representative of the community itself.
And you said you have some studies to show that?
Yeah, I can share those with you, and I'd happy to.
That's where they have, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Sorry, I'd be happy to sit down with you too. I don't know as much about the New York City studies, but I think they might address some of your concerns.
So those are publicly financed elections?
Yeah, well,
that-
the Baltimore City study was before the program existed. It hasn't happened yet. It was just looking at the demographics of the donors. But New York City, there's been research of how publicly financed elections for the city have impacted their donor class.
And you'll get that to me.
Yeah,
Thank you.
sure.
I believe that concludes the hearing on this bill. Thank all of you for your patience, and obviously you two for your testimony.
Thank you.
Okay, Senator Washington, I think you're up next in 742, election law, post-election tabulation audits.
Thank you, colleagues. Good afternoon, Chair Pinsky, Vice Chair Kagan, and members of our committee. I'm here to ask for your favorable report of SB 742. Let me first say that I commend Maryland's election administrators across the state for implementing strong systems to protect our voters and to protect our voting systems from cyber attacks, to detect and remedy any errors, and to protect citizens' right to cast a ballot for the person of their choice. Election officials in dozens of states representing both political parties have said there has been no evidence that fraud or any irregularities played a role in the outcome of our last presidential election or elections after that or prior to that. Too many have put forth false claims seeking to undermine our collective confidence in the fundamental institution of our democracy. They engage in this illusionary truth effect. It's a tendency to believe false information to be correct after repeated exposure. As elected officials, the bar should be really high. It's important for us to protect the integrity of our elections by being very careful about what we say and do to not undermine free and fair access to the ballot in the name of preventing some type of phantom voter fraud. We do, however, as policymakers, consider changes in the ways we do things or the context of things, when the context of the things we do change, when new practices or information come to light, or adjustments. We've considered processing mail-in ballots before Election Day, having ballot drop-off boxes, and many of them, and also looking at how many polling places we have and making sure that voters have access to a ballot box. So I just wanted to be clear that I said all of the preamble to say very clearly that this bill is not at all being offered in any sort of attempt to claim that our elections are not safe, that they are not secure, and that anyone's rights have been violated. It is made in the sense that I wish to continue to maintain the strong confidence that I have in our election system. And part of that strong confidence that I have in our election system is that we do conduct post-election audits. SB 742 just asks us to consider requiring the State Board of Elections to use a different method. It's called a risk-limiting audit. Additionally, SB 742 would require the Board of Elections, in conjunction with local boards, to immediately conduct a risk-limiting audit of the vote. The audit would involve examining random ballots in at least one statewide contest and at least one countywide contest or local contest. SB 742 would require risk-limiting audits to be completed before the election is certified, rather than up to 120 days after. The election. Now, under current law, SBE is required to conduct an audit. So we are conducting audits. And we are conducting the audits of the accuracy of our voting system's tabulation of the votes. And we do this following each statewide general election and primary election. We currently do this by reviewing ballots, the images of ballots that are cast. Additionally, the State Board of Elections may specify and conduct a manual audit of voter verifiable records. Our RLA, on the other hand, uses statistical means to confirm election results and takes advantage of paper ballots. SB 742 would ensure a transparent process for conducting the audit. And again, not implying that our current process is not transparent. It's another way of doing it. And posting a report describing the process and the results. So maintaining the integrity of the vote is one of the most important tasks of elected officials and the Board of Elections in Maryland. SB 742 would shift the focus from auditing the machines to auditing the election outcomes. It would be a truly robust post-election audit and should check whether or not the outcome of the election is correct. RLAs, as they are called, are a simple way to confirm whether voting machines are recording and tallying votes correctly. I respectfully request a favorable report on SB 742.
Thank you, Senator Washington. Thank you for that explanation. We've only heard a little bit about RLAs, risk-limiting audits, so I think we all need to learn more, and I'm glad you have some education, some folks here to educate us. Your lead witness is Mark Lindeman. Mr. Lindeman, you can come up to the front, and Morgan Drayton will also be testifying in favor. We have written testimony from the League of Women Voters. Mr. Lindeman, as the lead witness, you can have up to 5 minutes, and I believe you are here from out of town, so we are grateful for your travel and your presence. You may begin your testimony.
Thanks. I wish I'd realized I had 5 minutes. I'll try to slow down, but mostly I'll try to leave time for questions, because something I've learned is not to try to answer questions no one got to ask. Chair Pinsky, Vice Chair Kagan, Senator Washington, thank you, and members of the committee. My name is Mark Lindeman. I'm a Director of Verified Voting, which is a national nonpartisan nonprofit, which works to strengthen democracy for all voters by advocating for the responsible use of democracy in elections. Of technology in elections, although responsible use of democracy is also important. And we believe that the integrity and strength of our democracy depends on people's trust that every vote is counted as cast. So this bill is entirely on that point. I happen to have worked in, I think, half a dozen states so far to help local and state election officials implement risk-limiting audits. That includes Virginia, where I believe both chambers of the legislature now have passed a risk-limiting audit requirement. They're working on reconciling any differences, and we hope to see that soon. 3 states, in fact, in the last presidential election administered risk-limiting audits to confirm election outcomes. So this is, we think, the next big thing. I'll try not to be repetitive or duplicative of the written testimony, but you may have noticed that among the organizations that have expressed support for risk-limiting audits is the U.S. Department of Homeland Security. Why DHS? Well, simply put, this is a national security issue. This nation's adversaries have powerful incentives to target not just our voting and election systems, but more fundamentally, the public's confidence in those systems, which might even be a softer target. So we urgently need to equip our election officials with the tools and procedures they need to address both those threats, to protect and defend public confidence in elections. And that's what this bill is designed to do. As you've heard, a risk-limiting audit is a purpose-built tabulation audit. By a tabulation audit, I mean that, as Senator Washington said, a random sample of ballots or groups of ballots is selected and manually examined. And that manual evaluation of votes is compared to the electronic results to, one hopes, confirm the original reported results. A risk-limiting audit ends in one of 2 ways. Either it provides strong statistical evidence that the reported outcome is correct, that a full hand count would yield the same result, or if necessary, which it has not been so far, it leads to a full hand count to establish definitively the correct outcome. So either way, we're left with strong assurance that the outcome is correct. It's important that this be timely. It's important that this occur before certification, because that's when the public needs to know, and that's frankly when we all need to know who won an election, not 120 days afterwards. The worst possible scenario would be to discover, my goodness, in February, that there had been an outcome-altering miscount in an election the previous November. We simply can't afford that. This bill is very wise in mandating some essentials, including manual examination of the ballots, and also that the procedure be open to public observation. But it doesn't micromanage the specifics, which is so important because risk-limiting audits are flexible. They can be adapted to the needs and circumstances of various election officials, and new methods and combinations of methods are being developed in response to election officials' needs. So this bill would create a pilot in 2022 that allows election officials to refine and perhaps even experiment with some methods, and then mandate risk-limiting audits in subsequent statewide general elections. So I think this makes all the sense in the world. I congratulate the senator for introducing the bill, and I would be happy to help field questions afterwards.
Lindemann, and I'm sorry, are you Mr. Lindemann or Dr.?
I would answer to doctor.
Okay.
I don't stand on ceremony.
We try to offer the respect for somebody who has gotten a degree, so thank you. Ms. Drayton, welcome back.
Thank you. Again, for the record, my name is Morgan Drayton with Common Cause Maryland, and we are here in support of SB 742. We see this legislation as a critical first step needed to ensure that the results of our elections reflect the will of Maryland's voters. If and when our vote counting machines fail, this legislation presents an automatic process to check software errors and correct them if they're wrong. Our state system of marking and casting paper ballots is a great deterrent against any type of cyber attack. Paper ballots can be manually reviewed and recounted, but hand counting thousands of ballots is obviously a very time-consuming process. If Maryland establishes that election officials can use a risk-limiting audit, that workload is significantly diminished. With these audits, officials need only manually review and tally as many ballots as are needed to provide strong evidence that the machine-generated count is accurate. As we've heard, election administration and security experts agree that risk-limiting audits are the gold standard of post-election audits. In an era when the integrity of our election systems are facing unprecedented domestic and international threats. So we see that these audits will provide an added layer of election protection and give voters the confidence they need that the reported winner of our election is the actual winner. And for those reasons, we urge a favorable report. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Drayton. Thank you, Common Cause. Questions? I thought that Senator Simon Ayer might want to kick us off. Senator Simon Ayer.
Senator, thank you for this bill, and I appreciate that. So I'm not real familiar with this methodology. So does it basically take the physical ballots and match them with the electronic results and try to make sure they're correct? Is that what this is doing?
Shall I take that? Essentially. Now, there are several different ways that can work, Senator, and without getting too into the weeds.
Don't get into the weeds.
In some cases, it's a one-to-one comparison of ballots. In some cases, it's a one-to-one comparison of batches of ballots, such as all the ballots counted on a scanner. And in some cases, it's actually a random sample of ballots that isn't compared directly to any totals from the voting system, but you look for a preponderance of votes for the reported winner.
Okay. Okay. That's basically the high level. So to the senator, have we had any problems in Maryland with this? Do you know of any where the purported winner is not the winner and it was a problem of the machine?
No. Again, this is offered as, it's another methodology. It's using statistics. It's combining both the fact that we have paper ballots and allowing us to count a smaller, it's basically a way to be more efficient on what has thus far been, I believe, a very rigorous and a process that we can have confidence on. So it's just, so you have a typewriter, and now there's a computer, and horse and buggy, and now there's an electric car. So you still get there. You get to the same place. It's just, this might be another way to do it.
One thing I heard in the previous discussion today was we haven't seen any in Maryland, so it must not be happening. So why do we need this law? So I would ask you the same question with that logic. In a previous bill, it's like, we don't see any. So obviously, we don't need to put in more security. So if you're not seeing any problems, why do we need additional security?
I think I was talking about efficiency and sort of reaffirming, confidence. So my analogy wasn't about, is
No, I
that.
didn't mean you personally.
Yeah, no, I'm talking about the bill, sorry, the bill sponsor, me. It's not like, oh, is that a horse and buggy? Maybe it's not a horse and buggy, maybe it's a giraffe and a buggy, and I just think it's about, that's not the issue. It's that, this is a statistical, and I'm a social scientist, and this is just a statistical way to go about what we're doing manually. It's another way for us to consider.
No, and I appreciate
yeah.
it, and I support what you're trying to do. I think we
Yeah,
should.
but I just want to
look-
be really clear, this isn't about that I think the outcomes are wrong. It just is about when we learn of additional techniques, we should explore them, and.
Wholeheartedly
and
agree.
that's what this is about.
And then, just last thing for the doctor. So, at this point, when you do the audit, we've already not you personally, generically. We've already separated the identification from the person, and it's just a ballot, no person identified on it, correct?
Yes, that's very important.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Thank you, Senator Simonaire. I just want to, oh, no, I guess not. You're not here for this bill. Senator Ellis, please.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. The minority leader took some of my questions. That was questions I asked of him on his bill. I wanted to ask of you, but you answered it. But I'll ask you a question. What prompted you to think of the need for this legislation?
Well,
Senator.
it's frankly, it's back when I was in Ways and Means, as a delegate. And the chair, we had a briefing on risk limiting audits, and we've had briefings on just other things. I just explored, along with the cross-file, other methods that we could do to protect and continue to build confidence in our systems. And this seemed to me to be one that avoided a lot of the concerns that you expressed about these other signature checks. And there's no chance that people of color or seniors or anyone is going to be disproportionately impacted, right? Because it's looking at results as a group and comparing them. So it really eliminates a lot of the biases that we know that are associated with a lot of the existing recommendations around so-called, voter security.
Right. Thank you for that answer. So you'll be taking a statistical sample that's randomized and doing an audit based on that?
Yeah, and it's based on the outcome, yes.
What outcome is that?
That the statistical predicted winner is the same as the winner in the manually counted ballots.
Yeah. And so, do you think there is a climate of distrust in Maryland's electoral system that this would kind of fix?
No, I don't believe. I believe that most Marylanders, if not, I believe that most Marylanders trust our voting system, because clearly people, if they trust the system, they come out to vote, they participate. So we have high levels of participation. But as I said in our earlier remarks, and you suggested, that as long as we don't engage in some of the sort of the false truth-telling and illusionary effects that are happening in other places, we can maintain that. So again, this particular reform is devoid of any of that.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. And so if we don't have those issues here, why do we need a reform? I mean, why would we need this legislation if we don't have those issues? I'm just wondering if legislation like this just kind of add to the false narrative, even though it's good intention, a false narrative of, the house is burning, we need to fix it. So when people hear audit, 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 they're thinking, oh, there are problems.
But we already conduct audits. Like, that's existing law. This is just the methodology. So we already conduct post-election audits. We do that. And again, that's why I do have confidence in our system. This bill is simply about how do we do it.
Okay, so it's changing up the.
Hence my, what I thought was an effective analogy around the horse and drawn buggy versus the Tesla. But,
Well, sometimes I'm a little slow, Senator, so requires
no,
extra. So you're saying the state board conducts audits now?
They already-
Okay.
They've
So
been doing it.
this would be an additional tool or a replacement technique?
They would have the option to do this.
Okay, well, thank you,
So it
Senator.
doesn't keep them from doing what they're currently doing, but it would require that this be one of the things that they do. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, the automated audit would not be required by law, and no more than 25% of the ballots would be subject to an automated audit, so.
Thanks.
Yeah, he can, yeah.
Well, a couple of things. So first of all, as I understand the legislation, it replaces part of the requirement, not the automated audit that you were just discussing, but there's, to simplify, a 2% manual audit that must be conducted after statewide general elections within 120 days. And this replaces that, and in many cases would be less work, but more timely. I think let me say two things briefly about the state of Rhode Island. Rhode Island requires risk-limiting audits. In the first instance, that was inspired by a mishap in, I believe the city of Barrington. They had I think a school bond issue. There was what appears to have been a ballot programming error, which produced very bizarre results. A hand count found truly massive outcome-changing errors in the count. And at that point, Rhode Island said, we should look into risk-limiting audits, which they enacted. Rhode Island is not a state where the outcome of the presidential election would be widely considered to have been in serious doubt. But I was there in November 2020 to help with the conduct of their risk-limiting audit. And the officials said to me that they were really happy to be doing it because they'd been fielding calls from people who had seen the election day results that appeared to be very favorable to former President Trump. And then the results came back not favorable to President Trump, and people wondered what was going on. So they were happy to have the opportunity to get out in front of the false narratives. That's what I think timely, efficient post-election audits can do. And that's what this legislation, in my estimation, does.
Senator Ellis, you good? I'm good. Okay. Senator Ellis is the line of questioning. I'm sorry, I see others also. All right, I'll go to others first. Go ahead. Do you mind? I'm just going to follow on with Senator Ellis's line of questioning. Do you mind? And then Senator
Sure.
Carrizo? Okay, thank you. So I have some of the same concerns, and so the Barrington, Rhode Island example is really helpful. My question for you, Dr. Lindeman, was going to be, how would you balance the percentage? Is it 50-50? Is it 70-30? Like, how would you balance the find problems versus offer reassurance that the election went correctly? And we had a similar problem, actually, Baltimore County. There was Baltimore City, sorry. There was a council member who early polls were showing that he was getting slaughtered in the election results by someone who spent no money and kind of had just put his name on the ballot or something. And clearly there was something funky going on there, which was then corrected and the accurate results were released. So sometimes we know that there can be challenges, but I have similar concerns as those expressed by Senator Ellis. So please, Dr. Lindeman, how would you balance that?
Our organization doesn't have a position on that, but in my mind, I have little doubt that most ballots, most votes in the United States are counted correctly in every election. As a political scientist, I just think there's lots of evidence that supports that. So for me, this is primarily about giving election officials an opportunity to show the public, by auditing in public view, that the ballots really support the vote counts. And that whatever story might get started about what's really on the ballots, that has been debunked. So that's what I see here as especially crucial. It doesn't detract from the possibility of an actual error that a risk limiting audit might be in a position to correct.
Thank you, Dr. Lindeman. Senator Carozza, please.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. I've been listening really closely to the testimony for the risk limiting audits about the benefits of it. And we've talked about, by doing this type of audit, the integrity and the confidence that comes out of these audits, the manual review without over-prescribing specifics, and the information, Dr. Lindman, that you noted with the Department of Homeland Security supporting this. And and I also listened closely to the testimony on the signature audits.
Mm-hmm.
And many of the benefits, the positive aspects of the risk limiting audits applies to the signature audits. And so my
not this
question
bill.
is, Dr. Lindman, wouldn't there be some consistency, wouldn't there be some consistency in supporting audits for both a risk limiting audit and a signature verification audit? And I realize the bill sponsor is, waving you off, but it seems to me that there would be some consistency and value in both of those.
Senator, I'm not just waving you off. It is just fundamentally a different process. We are in this audit. You are not comparing ballots one-to-one. You are not. There is no subjective evaluation of what is a correct signature versus another correct signature. This is a very different process, and so that's why I'm waving it off. And I don't want to engage, in a what if. When the two are very separate, and just frankly, just giving me the respect to deal with the content of the bill that's before.
But my question, Senator, maybe I should have directed it to you, and I'm sorry that I didn't. They are different processes, but I talked about the benefits of both of those processes.
Right.
They have some consistency in, again, confidence in the system, integrity in the system. So my point is that, yes, they're different processes, and I'm not debating that. But it seems to me that the benefits of both are consistent.
Right.
Senator Carozza, I'm going to suggest that those comments are great for our voting session, but they're two different bills, and the hearing on the other bill has already been completed. And so I think what we want to focus on right now is risk-limiting audits and not trying to make
No, I
comparisons
understand
and
that,
all
Madam Vice Chair, and I respect that, but questions were asked earlier also about why do you need this? And no one's saying because there was all this, that's not why any of us are saying why you would need, whether it's signature audits or risk limiting audits. It's not to say there was all of these problems in the past, but I'm just saying there's some consistency and benefits to both of these.
And I want to restate that the problems with one, the signature has all, I think, as I said earlier, has all of the biases that are part of our existing society. They are disproportionately will impact low-income people. The signature would disproportionately impact people of color. There's a level of individual subjectivity and bias that is in the one method. So I'm happy you asked that, because I want to be very clear that, that audits aren't all the same. This is a very specific type of audit that really does not have any of the other biases that we know have been a part of our voting system from the first requirement that one had to be literate or to pay a poll tax or any number of things. This audit system does not have any of those. So, thank you.
But both benefit as far as integrity and
It benefits
confidence.
some people.
I apologize. Thank you, Lamaria.
Thank you.
Our awesome assistant to the chair makes all trains run on time, and so, sorry. Sometimes we make it harder for her. With that, I see no other questions from colleagues. So again, Dr. Lindman, thank you for your travel. Thank you for your presence. Ms. Drayton, always great to have you here. Senator Washington, thank you for the bill. That completes the hearing on Senate Bill 742. The next bill, we are hearing from the chairman, Senator Smith. Senate Bill 895, Declaration of Rights, Campaign Financing Right to Know. Welcome. We are delighted to have you here. And your lead witness is the wonderful Joanne Antoine, Common Cause. Ms. Antoine, welcome. You're welcome to come up. And Emily Scarr, who's also wonderful, from Maryland PIRG, the Public Interest Research Group. Thank you. Welcome all.
Thank you very much. And also, Madam Vice Chair, I have Jared Demeritus is on the sponsor panel, but just to answer questions, I know there's not room for him, but if members would like to hear more technical answers from him, he is available upon request. Good afternoon, everyone. Senator Smith from District 20 here to testify on behalf of Senate Bill 895, or Senate Bill 503, 895, 885. The right to know. So essentially, this bill's fairly straightforward. It would enshrine the right to know where campaign finance money comes from in our Constitution. So very simply put, it would say that every individual has the right to know information in an open, timely, and transparent manner about how and when and by whom money is spent and from whom the money is raised to influence the vote of the individual for candidates for office and ballot questions. Now, this is of paramount concern, or in particular concern, it should be for all of us, but for me, because I've dove into some of the numbers over the last decade or so. So since 2008, billions of dollars of special interest money has poured into our federal campaigns for federal office and for ballot initiatives across the United States. In 2016, nationwide, $1.4 billion was spent by independent expenditures. In 2018, $1.1 billion was spent by independent expenditures. And in 2020, $2.9 billion was spent independent expenditures. So all untraceable money that's being used to influence the outcome of elections and ballot questions across the United States. It's also a matter of foreign influence. Foreign companies can own parts of our corporations incorporated here in the United States and funnel money through those corporations to then, in turn, influence the outcomes of ballot initiatives across the United States. And I'll just read off a few of the more high-profile instances that came to mind through my research. Amazon spent $1.5 million to influence the results of Seattle's November 2019 city council races, donating through their local Chamber of Commerce PAC. In 2018, DaVita spent more than $66 million to successfully defeat a California ballot initiative. In 2016, Pinnacle West Capital Corporation spent $38 million to successfully defeat an Arizona clean energy ballot initiative. And another high-profile incident dating back to 2016, Duke Energy spent $6 million on a successful effort to stop a Florida initiative that would have expanded residential access to rooftop solar power. So the problem is clear. We deserve to have access to information and money to know where the contributing sources are that are influencing our elections. We in Maryland have some of the best campaign finance laws, thanks to your hard work in this committee, in the United States. And so what this amendment would do is enshrine that good work into our Constitution so that when the political winds change and flow, we still have a base level of right to know where the money to influence our campaigns is coming from. So plain and simple, that's what it is. Obviously, no constitutional amendment goes to the citizens of Maryland for a referendum in the next election cycle. And with that, I'd ask for the committee's favorable committee report. And stand by for questions.
Thank you, Senator Smith. Let's take the rest of your witnesses first. Ms. Scarr, Ms. Antoine, whichever one of you would like to go first.
I can. My name is Emily Scarr again. For the record, I'm the director of Maryland PIRG, the State Public Interest Research Group, here in support of SB 895. This would enshrine rights in the Maryland Constitution for transparency of political spending and for publicly financed elections. Our democracy is in a fragile state, and I, like many, are concerned that partisanship has driven our federal government to a virtual standstill. But I've been proud to work with this committee as well as local legislators across the state on common sense bipartisan measures that put our democracy first, and this bill is another opportunity to do that. Maryland has suffered because of some of the recent Supreme Court decisions, in particular overturning our aggregate campaign limits has unleashed virtually limitless amounts of money into the political process, which has driven up the cost to run for office at the state and local level. I could pull dozens of news clips that argue that super PACs and dark money benefits Republicans or Democrats depending on the year or the election, but we all suffer when big money is driving our elections. And as dark money mega donors flock to both parties, it creates a dangerous race to the bottom that leaves voters behind. I'm a Jewish woman from Kentucky, so I have to quote Louis Brandeis, who first said, "Sunlight is the best of disinfectants." Our democracy works best with an informed electorate, which is why voters need to have timely information on who is donating to candidates, parties, and other political groups and engaging in electoral spending. So putting this right into our Constitution would demonstrate a significant and meaningful commitment to those principles, sending a strong signal to the Supreme Court and protecting Maryland's law from legal attacks at the state level. Because unfortunately, there is growing concern about legal challenges to disclosure laws at both the state and federal level, trying to upend more than a century of precedent in upholding transparency laws. While we hope this amendment can just serve as a beacon of bipartisan hope for our democracy, ultimately it might also be needed to protect our state campaign finance laws and to be on record with the Supreme Court where Maryland stands on this critical issue. So we respectfully request a favorable report so we can send this issue to the voters.
Ms. Antoine, before you go, I made an error. You were the lead witness, and so you were the one who got 5 minutes. Ms. Scar took just over.
Yeah, I only need 2 minutes.
Yeah, okay, all right. I was going to say if we.
No, it's fine. We planned it well.
Okay, if you decide you want to take
my time back,
the balance of that for the 5 minutes.
Yes, thank you
please.
so much.
Sorry about that.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chairwoman, Chairwoman Kagan and members of the committee. For the record, Joanne Antoine, Executive Director of Common Cause Maryland, testifying in support of Senate Bill 895, which would enshrine in our Constitution Marylanders' right to know who and what entities are spending money to influence their vote, and more importantly, protects their right to participate in publicly financed elections. I think our partners at PIRG have done a great job already of highlighting the need to protect the transparency that we've managed to secure here in the state, so I'm not going to focus on that as much. I'll just flag that if you look at our testimony, you'll see an example of a recent SCOTUS decision from this past July around, I think it's the Americans for Prosperity Foundation, Vibonta, which in that case, they decided not to move forward with the legislature's decision to disclose entities or individuals that were donating to charitable organizations that were participating in their elections. Whereas in our case, in Maryland, participating organizations, once we've reached a certain threshold of $6,000, we are required by law to disclose individuals that are giving money to us, ensuring that mega donors, large special interests, are unable to hide behind these organizations. I think more importantly, SB 895, again, affirms our right to participate in public financed elections. Before I came to Common Cause, the legislature took very swift action following the Citizens United decision, moving forward with the Campaign Finance Reform Act, which included a number of provisions, but enabled local jurisdictions to move forward with establishing these programs. This was in addition to the already existing statewide program, which we've, since last session, have modernized, funded, and is actually in use. I believe the gubernatorial candidates have since just qualified for matching funds. But it really is our county by county model that has made us a national model. We've now have 5 jurisdictions that have established programs. 2 of them, you said I had time. 2 of them currently in use and so forth. And, I guess, again, this bill just ensures that, we are protecting the programs that already exist and that we are protecting our right to continue establishing these programs at the local level and hopefully at the state level for the legislature and hopefully Comptroller AG. So with that, we urge a favorable report. Thank you.
And thank you, Ms. Scar. Senator Smith, I'm going to kick off the questions. I don't know whether my colleagues will have other questions. But you laid out a whole list of DaVita and Amazon and all that. So if the purpose of this, and for those in the audience or watching at home, since it's only a few lines, I'm just going to read. This is under the Declaration of Rights, and this would go on the ballot for this November if this were to pass the Senate and the House by 3/5 majority in exactly this way. Then it would go on the ballot, and it says that every individual has the right to know information in an open, timely, and transparent manner about how, when, and by whom money is spent and from whom money is raised to influence the vote of the individual for candidates for office and ballot questions. So the question is, and then it says the publicly financed elections is are the right of the people. So you just gave us several examples. How did you get that information? Because we're looking for transparency, so it's transparent somewhere. So if you can talk about that. And then my bigger question, frankly, is about implementation. Because I read the whole thing, and it doesn't say how soon, how often, how many, where, how. Would this go to the State Board of Election or to our local boards of elections? And can you just give us any details on that, please?
So the information was, actually, we had some of our trustee staff do some research. So that was publicly available through some of these oversight watchdog groups that have done it. So I can provide you those citations and those reports to show you where the information was derived from. With respect to how this would be implemented, it would be almost like any constitutional amendment. Basically, what you're talking about is standing. Is kind of what you're squinting toward, is who would have standing. So whenever you have a constitutional amendment, you have to think, well, who has the ability to go to the courts to enforce the rights that are on the books. This would essentially say, look, if there's a right in the book, there's a law in the book right now that deals with transparency, like, when we have someone that donates to our campaign, we have to disclose that. Let's say something gets peeled back, we regress in that respect. Then the issue would be who would have standing to bring that to the court to say, hey, look, we have a constitutional right. And that would be something that needed to be sussed out in the court system. I will say that there are federal, obviously the Supreme Court has defined what standing is. Here in Maryland, we have standing, common law definitions of standing. I specifically think of towards nuisance. We use that for a bill, a hate crimes bill that we all voted for about a week ago on the floor. So I can give you what that would mean. I can say, so federal law has more of a, well, I'd say the Supreme Court has spoken to this specifically. Someone that has suffered an injury in fact that is concrete and particularized, actual or imminent, non-conjectural or hypothetical. In Maryland, that nuisance that I talked about, it deals mostly, it says if an individual is seeking redress for a public wrong that is some kind of special damage, such wrong that's different in character and kind from that suffered from the general public. So that's something that would have to be sussed out in the courts.
Okay. And one follow-up question, if I could, Mr. Chairman. Could you please just explain, since we are not populated by attorneys, why you brought this as a constitutional amendment rather than a bill with the details to lay all this out?
Because when you enshrine something in the Constitution, you have to go back to the people through that referendum process to fix it and to change it. Whereas a law, you can come back, we meet for 90 days every single year. So there's more fluidity with statute than there is with something being enshrined in the Constitution. But we enshrine things like this in the Constitution all the time. You may be aware that we are debating, the House right now is debating a referendum on cannabis. That would then go into the Constitution. Gambling has gone into the Constitution. A victim's rights, a victim of crime shall be treated by the agents of the state with dignity, respect, and sensitivity. So there's a whole gambit of things that go into the Constitution. Why not have the simple right of asking, of being able to know where and how our elections are influenced, enshrined in the Constitution?
Okay. Thank you, Senator Smith. Senator Gallion, followed by Senator Ellis.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for being here. In the bill, the part that mentions a publicly financed election is a right of the people. So that's not talking about like the fact that the state's going to conduct the whole election. It's talking about the financing of certain campaigns, correct, through the public financing that we had a bill on earlier. So my question with that is, and this is really me personally, but I'll get you to answer it. You look at what our tax dollars go to. I don't mind going to education. That's where the hugest chunk probably goes, public safety. Why should my tax dollars go to potentially fund a candidate that I don't like or don't care for? Why should my tax dollars go towards that?
I can answer that question, or you guys can answer it too. But I would just say, I mean, look, the governor now won on a publicly financed campaign. So, I mean, that was the first statewide candidate to win through public financing. But devoid of the actual politics, it's the system that you're trying to change, which is to kind of disenthrall the system from special interest and have publicly financed clean elections so that you can compete on ideas and the merits of your background and your qualifications, as opposed to special interests controlling and guiding the process and outcomes.
But with this still, I mean, if you spend it, your money's going towards state taxes, and that money is going to, down the line, end up going to folks that, candidates on both sides that you just, don't particularly care for.
I was much displeased with the outcome of the gubernatorial election, not to insert politics into it, but I was proud to see that the mechanism actually worked. And so, for me, it's a balancing act, and on aggregate, it's going to balance out for all of us, because as many candidates that win from your political persuasion will, as many will lose the other political persuasion. So it'll balance out in the aggregate. But I'd like to, yeah.
I was going to say, if I can jump into, just to clarify that, again, the bill does not mandate that any jurisdiction now, it doesn't change the jurisdiction's charter. If it's required to go to the ballot, that would still be, that would still happen at the local level, and it would be up to the voters in that county to decide whether or not they'd want to establish that program. So again, this does not say that we are, counties, you all are going to adopt this at the state level, you're all going to adopt this. This is just, again, affirming that it is a right available to us.
And it more protects our existing programs, the state gubernatorial program, our county fair programs, which have passed through the legislature, some at the ballot, from attack, so that can remain. So there's still a legislative process to establish these programs. It's not extending the policies that currently exist, but saying we don't want those to be taken out. We think that we should protect them. Taking what's already in our state code, I think this is already in law, and actually shifting it to the Constitution.
Senator Gallion. Senator Ellis, please.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Vice Chair, and thank you, Chairman Smith, for this thoughtful legislation. And so, in the bill, refers to the U.S. Constitution, but this amendment would be in the Maryland Constitution. Is that correct? Okay,
Yes.
So it's not meant to influence the U.S. Congress to do something similar? Is that?
No, just this only controls, everything that's happening in Maryland.
Yeah, okay, thank you. And so I'm looking at the title related to the bill, Campaign Finance and Right to Know. So I'm trying to understand what kind of things are hidden right now that this constitutional amendment will kind of bring open. So as information, so I thought that requirement for us to let the public know is already there. And so I'm trying to see what additive value this amendment would bring to the process right now.
Yeah, I mean, again, you're right. Like, Maryland does have, in terms of transparency, our disclosure laws, we are, in a lot of ways, a national model. But again, this does not change the existing laws, the campaign finance laws that we have in place. All we are doing here is protecting it. We are putting a process in place in theory where if the example from California, where in that case the Supreme Court, decided that those participating organizations did not have to disclose their contributors, that were playing a role in the ballot measures that they were involved in. Here in Maryland, we are saying that would not stand, and that, we would be able to take that to court if that makes sense, hopefully the way that I'm communicating it. But we are protecting the transparency that we already have in place, the disclosures you have. But I will say that there are places where we lack, right? I think LLCs has always been a great example, where a lot of times we have
Sorry, what's the example?
LLCs, limited life. Yes, LLCs, where a lot of times contributions are being made to candidates, and because we have not put a process in place that connects MD Chris to SDAT, a lot of times we are unable to identify where and individuals creating, more easily LLCs just to be able to circumvent our campaign finance laws.
Okay.
So unless you're going back and tracking who created that business, and finding who it is, that's a good example of where sometimes we aren't able to track down who is actually coming in and funding our
I'm
elections.
sure that's a good answer. So you use LLC.
Yeah, I was
MD
just gonna,
Chris,
I was just
and
gonna
so-
help with acronyms
Oh,
for a second.
Oh, sorry.
So LLC, the Limited Liability Corporation, she already translated, but MD Chris is our campaign finance system in the state, and and SDAT is the State Department of Assessments and Taxation,
Yes.
for anyone who doesn't know the alphabet soup of Maryland government.
Sorry.
Yes,
Yeah,
please,
so,
if we
yeah,
can
thank
try
you.
to avoid those,
Yes.
you guys and in the future, yes.
So-
Senator Ellis, back to you.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. And so you're saying that, so limited liability company owners, they're exempt from some of these disclosure laws?
No, it's often easier for limited liability corporations to evade by being not clear who owns the corporation. And this wouldn't actually change any of that. Joanne was just giving an example of, we have strong transparency laws. That doesn't mean we think we have perfect transparency laws, but if we ever wanted to have stronger transparency laws, it's not like this constitutional amendment automatically grants that. We would still have to go to the legislature and ask for new laws to give more access to who owns an LLC.
thank
But
you.
this is more defensive.
And so, in listening to your testimony, Ms. Antoine, you were saying that the threat might be from your Supreme Court, who might,
California
No.
State.
Yeah, that was a decision, and it's still being deliberated in the courts. But I think I just gave you an example, right? Where if we as if the legislature, for some reason, were to introduce a bill that is somehow being passed that would, kind of repeal the bill that we have in place around, disclosure for participating organizations, that would be something that, again, is enshrined in our Constitution, that we should know who is funding our elections, regardless if they are giving to Common Cause, which participates in ballot measures and so forth, and from there, there's a process.
thank you. So you're saying, so the U.S. Supreme Court can rule that a Maryland law is unconstitutional, but if it's enshrined in the Constitution of Maryland, you're saying that they can't rule that our Constitution is unconstitutional. Is that what you're saying?
Well,
So
our
it's
lawyer
enshrined?
might have better
Yeah,
answer.
yeah.
If there's any lawsuits to our state laws in our state courts, this certainly will help the state defend against them.
Okay.
If the Supreme Court takes up something that impacts us, right, they can overrule anything. But when they're collecting their briefs, when they're making their cases, having the fact that it is a Maryland state constitution certainly should help any defense of our campaign finance laws. So my example of aggregate campaign contributions, those were no one sued Maryland for having an aggregate campaign limit of $10,000. So that was a law that said, if I'm Emily and I have a lot of money, I can give $10,000 to candidates running for state office total. Each has a $2,000 limit, but I can't give more than $10,000. When the Supreme Court overruled federal aggregate campaign limits, Jared, State Board of Elections, said, we're not going to enforce ours anymore because we would lose in court. While it would never change what the Supreme Court can do, it would strengthen our state laws from state suits.
So you mentioned a $10,000 limit. I thought it was at $6,000.
$6,000 per candidate, but as a donor, I used to only be able to give out $10,000 total to candidates at all levels of government. So I could give $6,000 to one and $4,000 to another, and I'd be done. Now I can give $6,000 to every single state senator if I wanted to.
Because the Supreme Court ruled.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, you really educated me today. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator Ellis. Thank you, Ms. Scar. We need to have conversations.
Love talking campaign finance.
Senator Simon Ayer has questions.
Yeah, and if I could ask Jared to come up, because some of them are pertaining. Senator, you don't have to go anywhere. I got a question for you.
I figured you did.
Just for those who are just tuning in, Jared DeMarinis is the wonderful, fabulous legislative liaison and go-to person at the State Board of Elections. So thank you, Mr. DeMarinis, for all you do.
So,
Thank you.
looking at this, I hear words enshrining, expanding, and protecting and all that. If this were to pass, people approve it, what expansion of transparency would be at the state board with how it goes with money? I mean,
With
people
money?
get, as far as getting more transparent, is this going to do anything to have more transparency?
Well, it won't increase my budget, that's for sure. If that's the part of the question there, Senator, yes.
No, that wasn't.
Jared Demarin is Director of Candidacy and Campaign Finance for the Maryland State Board of Elections, just for the record there. No, this is basically preventing a backslide from all the progress that Maryland has made. As some of the panelists has mentioned, we are one of the, 4, I guess, leaders in campaign finance disclosure, and this would basically enshrine and solidify those achievements and progress that we've made there, so that in future, in 20 years or something like that, if a person wants to, say, get rid of a disclosure law, they would then have to meet the constitutional threshold that this would enact. And so it doesn't necessarily increase any money, it doesn't increase disclosure at the current state here, it just protects what we have and prevents backsliding.
Okay, there was a point made also that if a court case was brought, that we have current law that says you can and can't do certain things. If it's in the Constitution, does that give it more weight that if it's just because it's in law, they could overturn it? Because they say it's in law, but we can overturn that, but if it's in the Constitution, we can't overturn it.
Well,
Maybe
I mean,
that's for the senator, too.
Yeah, I was going to say that, or
Well, we both answer that, but I mean, this amendment doesn't micromanage. You're in control of the level of transparency that we have now and in the future. What it does, as Mr. Demarin said, is that it prevents that backsliding from if someone in the future wants to say, hey, look, we don't necessarily want to disclose that now. Let's take that off of our books in the code. Then you'd have to go and say, look, does this meet constitutional muster for this constitutionally enshrined right for a right to know?
Okay, and I mean, I guess we could do that for a lot of laws if we really believe in this law, so we want to throw it in the Constitution. But are you concerned, I mean, as far as bringing this bill in, I mean, the majority party has a supermajority, and they've had it since the 1800s. Are you worried that the majority party wants to backslide, and this is you're putting in there so they don't? Because, quite frankly, since 1800s, the minority party hasn't had any chance to do this, so it would simply be coming from the majority party. Is that your concern for putting this in there?
I think it's devoid of the political. I mean, it's more about just transparency and ensuring that both parties have it. So it's not a partisan majority party minority party thing.
No, but I mean, as far as
thing.
it changing, because that was your main thing, is we don't want to backslide. The only way it would backslide since the 1800s is going through the majority party.
Yeah.
And so my question is there a concern in your majority that some are talking about backsliding, so we need to put this in the Constitution?
No, I mean, I think given Supreme Court precedent, and the saying that, look, a corporation is essentially granted personhood, and then has unfettered ability to dump money into elections, I think that's an indicator of where things could go. We, as a legislature, have acted in a bipartisan manner to implement the laws that we have, the transparency laws that we have on the books. So in that respect, it's been a bipartisan effort. But I think national trends have shown, there is a possibility for backslide.
Okay, so I think I understand. Just one more question. I mean, it's really like two things. So you put it on the ballot and you say, do you want more access and transparency, or apple pie, basically. So the voter's going to love that. But there's that little second one is B, which says that a publicly financed election is a right of the people. Now, if that's a right, and I'm not a lawyer, so this is where you can help me. If I have a right to that, how do I get to pick and say this county doesn't have to do it and this county has to do it, this state office? If it's a right, how can you discriminate?
So it's based on as we talked about, the legislative, what jurisdictions have what on the books at any given time. It prevents the backslide. So, you can still control your destiny as to what you put on the books.
So it doesn't create a right? I mean, if I'm saying you as an individual have the right to public finance, and our county says, no, we're not going to give that to you, how can you deny a right?
So one of the parts, too, about this is that it basically codifies, it elevates a principle that the General Assembly has already stated about almost 50 years ago, which says that a system of representative government depends in part in guaranteeing that election campaigns are funded by and for the people and eliminating corrupting, undemocratic effects of large corporations. That's currently in law that the General Assembly has initiated for public financing. So you've already stated your policy about what you want for public financing. So this is just taking that sentiment and that intent and elevating it into a constitutional principle.
Okay, and then I'll ask you more offline, but
Sure.
it just seems on the surface, and I'm not a lawyer, but if we put a right in the Constitution to have public finances, and it's unlimited in the Constitution, it doesn't say just for the governor's race or just for the delegate or whatever, it says you have a right to public. How can I not go to the courts and say, I want to run for whatever, I have a right to get public financing? How could they deny me?
Well, I guess then it's still up to the individual places to fund it and go forward with it, the same sort of principle that the General Assembly initiated. And by the way, if you want to look that up, it's Election Law Article 15-101, that the sentiment of public financing, that was the statement here. So in a sense that it's something that then individuals would still have the right to go to in front of a county council or a municipality and try to establish said programs there. So it's something that they have the right to do, but it still has to go through the legislative process for the actual nuts and bolts of the funding portion of it. Okay. So I guess at one point here, it's one of those things that if you do have a program, then you have initiated this right, and therefore it would be very difficult not to fund the program. But if you don't initiate the programs, then it doesn't really create any sort of obligation to do so. And I think that's where you're going with that. It doesn't create an obligation, but
I'm thinking of the education, where I believe in the Constitution says you have to sufficiently fund education, and I believe that's been brought to court. And I'm just thinking that this is setting the groundwork that they all have to do that. So we can have more offline.
Mayor, I see no other lights, so that completes the hearing on a very interesting bill, Senate Bill 895. Thank you, Chairman Smith. Thank you, Jared Demarinis, Ms. Scar, Ms. Antoine. We will see you all again, I'm sure. The next bill we have is Senator Waldstreicher, Senate Bill 321, Election Law, Polling Sites, Firearms Prohibitions. Welcome, Mr. Vice Chair. Your lead witness is Moira Cyphers. If Ms. Cyphers is in the room, she can come forward and join you at the table.
Thank you. I think she is on her way in.
Okay, well, you may begin. Welcome back to EHE.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Feels like JPR in here today. So, Madam Chair, members of the committee, everyone should be able to vote free from fear and intimidation. That is especially true during these very polarizing times. This bill, SB 329, bans guns at polling places and 100 feet from a polling place. It makes the obvious exceptions for law enforcement officers. Now, 10 states have this law. That includes blue states like California that are traditionally pro-gun safety. It includes red states like Texas that allow open carry and are traditionally pro-Second Amendment. This bill passed this committee and this chamber last year, but got caught in the House on sine die. It includes a friendly amendment that we took last year to include off-duty law enforcement officers. I ask for a favorable report.
Brevity, Senator Waldstreicher, we do have had this, I can't even speak anymore. We did have this bill last year. Ms. Cyphers, why don't you add your testimony as lead witness? You have up to 5 minutes.
Okay, I assure you I won't take that long, Madam Vice Chair. Oh, thank you. Maura Cyphers, for the record, with Compass Government Relations. I represent Giffords and the Giffords Law Center, which was founded by Congresswoman Gab Giffords, who is a gun violence survivor. They asked me to be here today because they weren't able to get up here in time, but We thank this committee for the work they did on the bill last year, and thank Senator Waldstreicher for bringing it again, and the Senate for taking leadership in passing this legislation. I think as we recall in 2020, Americans were really sort of gymmed up by baseless claims of election fraud. And then in 2021, we saw some serious violence happening in our capital, and we've seen increased gun violence in spaces where guns don't belong, like the polls. And so I think, to just very quickly sum up my testimony here today, threatening the lives of federal officials, using guns to do things like chill speech, and, I think bringing threats to the polls have been in the past used to disenfranchise Black and brown Americans who are already disproportionately impacted by gun violence. This legislation is very important. It's a priority for Giffords, and so, we urge your favorable report. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Cyphers. For anybody who's either in the audience or watching at home who doesn't remember the name Gabby Giffords because you're too young or don't remember it just generally, she was a member of Congress from Arizona, and on January 8th, 2011, she was shot, and along with 18 others. And there were 6 people who died, including a 9-year-old child. And so the Giffords Center does important policy work, and I'm glad you're here representing them. Thank you.
Thank you.
So with that, colleagues, are there questions for Vice Chairman? Yes, Senator
Thank you,
Gallion.
Madam Vice Chair. Thank you, Senator. I have a question. So, and I think this was brought up last year, but, a lot happens in a year. You kind of forget some of the answers. So, I'm a member of Volunteer Fire Company. It also happens to be a precinct, a polling precinct. You have members that are, off-duty police officers, whatnot, that potentially could legally be carrying a firearm in the firehouse while they're in the recreation facility or whatever. Is that allowed in this bill?
So I'd have to take a closer look at the text and get back to you. We have included that, if you are in your residence and you happen to live within 100 feet of the polling place, you would not be included in this bill. So I imagine we could adopt something in the same spirit of what you're saying.
Okay, because that is a concern, where you have membership, some of them, off-duty police officers and whatnot that are, at the firehouse, a volunteer firehouse, staffing the station, ready to serve their community. And, so I just had a question with that. So appreciate any follow-up you could give.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Senator Gallion, for your question. I see no other questions for you two. I think people remember this issue, so thank you for being with us. That completes the hearing on Senate Bill 320. Oh, I'm sorry, there are unfavorables. Okay, that completes the hearing for you guys. We have 2 unfavorable, so Mark Pennock, Maryland Shall Issue, Inc., and Katie Novotny. You can both come up to the table, just sit a little socially distant if you would. Welcome to EHE. And each of you will have up to 2 minutes for your testimony, and you can go in either order.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My name is Mark Pennock. I'm the president of Maryland Shall Issue. You should have in your packet my written testimony about this bill. One, the bill as written is unconstitutional in DC versus Heller because it bans possession in the home, if the home happens to be located within 100 feet. 2, the bill is a solution in search of a problem. Current Maryland law already bans voter intimidation, including the use of firearms. So there's absolutely no reason to ban it again. 3, the state laws to which the good senator referred are far less restrictive than this bill would be, including Texas. The California bill only bans the stationing or posting of an armed individual. Now, no one likes voter intimidation, me least of all, but I will tell you that this bill does far more than that because it is really quite unnecessary. If the bill were to be written to simply ban open carry in or at a polling station, we would have no objection. But this bill also bans a permit carrier, and there's only 27,000 in the whole state of Maryland who have carry permits in the state. Compare that to Pennsylvania, which has 1.4 million. Pennsylvania doesn't have this law. It doesn't see any need for it. This bill is not necessary, but the person who has a permit must choose between voting or not voting and foregoing the right to carry for self-defense. In Maryland, you need a good and substantial reason in order to carry. So a person who has demonstrated to the state police that they have a good substantial reason for self-protection is basically banned from carrying their firearm concealed into a voting place where there's no possible intimidation. We urge an unfavorable report.
Thank you, Mr. Pennock, and thank you for respecting the time. And the next witness, Katie Novotny. Welcome.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Katie Novotny. I'm coming to you from District 35B, and I oppose this bill. Mr. Pennock gave a number of reasons, of issues with the law with this bill. But again, this is just not a problem in the state of Maryland in modern times. Certainly in the past, there have been issues of voter intimidation. Bills have been passed since that time to make it illegal to, participate in voter intimidation at polls. Those bills are already on the books, and certainly threatening people with firearms would fall under that law of, voter intimidation. And these attempts are very rare in Maryland. If you look at my written testimony, you'll find a link to a Baltimore Sun article dated December 11th, 2020, titled "Few Incidents of Voter Intimidation or Harassment Reported in Maryland." This article reports only 27 complaints of possible voter intimidation, and of all the examples they gave, none involve firearms. So the biggest threat they found was from misleading robocalls, which this bill does nothing to stop. This also creates gun-free zones. And I think we can all, we've all seen the FBI data. Gun-free zones are where, people target. People who want to commit acts of violence know that they can target a gun-free zone and no one can fight back. This bill has no provisions to require armed security to protect these people, these lawful permit holders that you are not allowing to carry their firearm. There's no protection for them provided by this bill. So I request an unfavorable report. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Novotny. Mr. Pennock, I'm going to take the prerogative to ask you a quick question, if I could.
Yes.
Page 3, so you said this was unconstitutional because it forbid people from having a gun in their home. On page 3, lines 5 through 9, it says the residence of the individuals within 100 feet of a privately or publicly owned building being used as a polling site during an election, and the individual is transferring the firearm to the individual's residence or vehicle within 100 feet of a polling place. And those are both conditions under which this law would not apply. So maybe I wasn't understanding you correctly. Could you clarify, please?
So I was referencing the bill as originally filed. Now, in the House, there was a amendment to the bill, and I'm not sure if this was what you're referring to, Madam Vice Chair, because in the House amendment submitted by the sponsor, they actually take care of this problem by making clear that a resident within 100 feet is actually not covered by this bill. And that we welcome that, and we would welcome that amendment here. It's not clear to me that amendment has been submitted to this committee, and certainly, if so, I have not seen it. So that is a big improvement. And certainly, people who drive by a polling space on their way to the range ought not to be charged with this crime as well. So these are the kind of amendments that we encouraged. I actually worked with Delegate Hinton on that very amendment, and we congratulate her for that. And I'm glad if it is part of this bill, I'm very pleased to see that.
Thank you, Mr. Pennock. So the senator is clearly, the sponsor of the bill is clearly listening to us. I'm not looking at amendment. I'm looking at the bill as it was filed. So it's possible that the Senate and House versions were a little bit different, because this does not seem to be amended, and what I read to you was from the current version of the bill as filed.
So the current version of the bill as originally filed covers transfers. It doesn't cover possession. And then transferring is simply the act of moving from one place to the other. It does not, by its terms, recover an act of possession where you're not transferring. So if you're not transferring your weapon from your home to a vehicle, you're just having it in possession, this bill would still illegalize that.
Sorry, I did not read Section 1 because that wasn't what you had specifically said. You had talked about residents, and that was Sections 2 and 3. Section 1, when it also would not apply, is if the individual is legally in possession of a firearm. So we can, maybe you can connect with the sponsor of the bill, but I think that some of your concerns, maybe from last year's version, have been addressed in this year's version.
Again, Senator, I would hope that's to be the case.
Okay, appreciate it. I think testimony, opposition testimony helps us do a better job with our legislation, so thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you both. I see no questions from, oh yes, Senator Carozza, please.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. And since there were issues on safety that were raised in your testimony regarding the issues with gun-free zones and being targets, I'd appreciate if both of you would give a brief response to the risk and the safety issues involved with these gun-free zones.
Yes, I'd be delighted to. Because that is a huge issue. The research on this is quite definitive. It's like 97% of mass shootings occur in gun-free zones, and that's been true since 1950. So once you create a gun-free zone, you're basically inviting the deranged or the mass shooters to that spot because they know that they will not encounter opposition. Now, right now, I don't think anybody in this committee would have any desire to post a gun-free zone outside their own homes. It's better to have people wonder. But this bill posts a sign outside of every polling place that says, don't worry about this place, you won't require any opposition. And that is counterproductive, to say the least. The whole idea is to keep the mass shooter guessing. This is why we strongly favor allowing people with permits to actually vote with concealed weapons permits that the state police issue, allowing them to vote, because they add a layer of uncertainty to the mass shooter's mind. And I've seen this over and over again in the instances where somebody with a permit could have stopped a mass shooter and was deprived of the opportunity because it was a gun-free zone. It's over and over again. So I would urge the committee to think for a moment about allowing permit holders not to be faced with the choice of foregoing their self-defense rights as recognized by the state police and voting. They actually can add a measure of security to this process.
Thank you, Mr. Penick. Thank you, Senator Carozza.
And I'd like Ms. Navante to give her an opportunity.
Usually we have just one person respond to a question. Okay. Thank you very much, Ms. Novotny, Mr. Penick. Thank you, Vice Chair Waldstreicher, and everyone else. That completes the hearing on Senate Bill 329. Back to the chairman.
Thank you. We're moving to Senate Bill 413, Senator Sidnor, Voting Rights Act of 2022, Counties and Municipalities. Senator Sidnor, as he walks forward, he'll be joined by Willie Flowers of the NAACP, Beth Huffnagel, Morgan Drayton, and Samuela Ansa. Not all of you at once. We want to keep a little space, keep us healthy. Some folks can stay in the first row. And I believe there's no oral opposition. There's one letter of opposition. The rest of the written is favorable. Senator Sidnor, welcome to EHE.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon. This bill was certainly nothing that I was looking for, but it happened because of an incident that had happened in my county this past year. Baltimore County, along with most other counties, were going through its redistricting process. We had a council or commission that was put together. They produced maps that, on their face, to me, looked as violating the Voting Rights Act. So I reached out to the Attorney General just to ask whether or not they had any authority to do anything about this, and was told that essentially they did not. So thankfully, in working along with partners from the ACLU, the NAACP, Common Cause, the League of Women Voters, as well as 6 other citizens of Baltimore County, we sued Baltimore County for its maps, and just yesterday, the court placed an injunction on Baltimore County, and the map that it's produced, so I think by March 8th, if they don't appeal, God forbid, they have to put a new map in place. So it's my understanding that because of the way our government is set up, the Attorney General, their power is statutory. So in order to ensure that our Attorney General has the ability to do something, and in my mind, what I thought was, well, our Attorney General should be essentially be what the U.S. Attorney is at this level. So obviously, if the U.S. Attorney that could come in, and if a county or municipality is violating the Voting Rights Act, they could come in and do something. But it's a large country. They don't have the resources to be doing that. So one of the suggestions was that I believe it's in California, and I believe there may be one other state, but the Attorney General is given that authority to come in and enforce that state's Voting Rights Act. So what this bill does is essentially does just that. It gives the Attorney General the ability to come in and enforce this act if a municipality or a county violates essentially the Voting Rights Act. But the Voting Rights Act here will be codified here within the state law. So that, in essence, is this bill, and I hope that we can get a favorable report.
Hey, Mr. Flowers.
Good afternoon, or good evening, is it? My name is Willie Flowers, and I am here on behalf of the Maryland State Conference NAACP, and we push forth a favorable report on the bill. And you have my testimony, but in essence, I'm glad that the senator highlighted the issue in Baltimore County, which is extremely important. And the issue in Baltimore County, while it talks about redistricting and reapportionment, that's one piece of challenges that you have when we're talking about the Voting Rights Act. But the other piece is how we align districts. And in the state of Maryland, there are a lot of counties, there are a lot of city governments, and even the Senate legislative district with at-large delegate, a House of Delegates, House of Delegate members is an at-large election that can lead to a lack of representation for people because it's an at-large situation. And as we know, and I think a lot of the conversation today is about how people who have the power, authority, money, or whatever can stay in office, and people who can't get the resources don't get into office. All of this cannot be resolved by bringing a bill every year to, I love you guys, to the Senate here in Maryland, or the House of Delegates to be signed by the governor. It could take years, and it's unfortunate that that's a fact. And because of that, I'm here to say that we have apathetic populations that don't vote at all. We have all of these negative realities about the system of government that we live in, and that's very unfortunate. What I think this bill does, and I see the value of it overall, is that it gives us a local authority to oversee these. In all of these other cases, there could be a protracted court case that leads to another court case that leads to another court case. I think that the senator's bill gives us a responsible agency in the state of Maryland that can take care of these challenges without going to the federal government. And I think that's very important, and I think that the state of Maryland should be proud that you have the opportunity to pass a bill that would do that for us. And I guess it would be complemented by the Attorney General's office, but also the Civil Rights Division of the Attorney General's office. And I think that a lot of our state issues will be resolved. And I think this is a very good step. And again, we support approval of this bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Flowers. Senator, do you mind if we go to the other two people?
Sure.
And then you wait around, we'll take
Yes, sir.
questions? It'll be quick. Then let's go to Ms. Hufnagel and Ms. Drayton and Ms. Ansah, if you're here. Whatever order you want, don't be bashful.
I'm not a bashful woman, so I will go first.
Why am I not surprised?
I'm Beth Hufnagel, and I am the chair of the League of Women Voters of Maryland Redistricting Committee, and I'm here to urge a favorable report on Senate Bill 413. I am lucky to be here today. I am lucky on so many counts. I was born white. I was born with a school system where I had excellent public schools. They were segregated, but they were excellent. I also was lucky in that I had a high school sweetheart whose family took me door knocking when I was 16 for local elected officials. So I believed and had a culture that the individual could affect the local politicians. This bill is not about the lucky ones. This bill is about everybody else. And I draw you to a phrase, you have this in written, but the way things are now, if you have a problem, you have to sue. Now, we don't have a family lawyer until recently, never had such a thing, and this is not something that many people have access to. So to say this puts the cost of justice on the very communities that can least afford it. There are limited, and because of that, I think that's why there are limited examples. 1985, Dorchester. At the time, an audit also says Somerset had troubles. Nothing ever came of that. So I think there's more out there than we can see. So again, we urge a favorable report on Senate Bill 413. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. My name is Morgan Drayton, for the record, Policy and Engagement Manager for Common Cause Maryland, and we are in favor of SB 413. This legislation will give Marylanders a broader category of voting rights by expressly empowering the State Attorney General to intervene and ensure that our fundamental right to vote is protected in the event that local governments violate federal voting laws. The goal of this legislation, as we've heard, is to bolster protections for minorities by making it clear that the Attorney General has the power to apply the full weight of federal voting laws to intervene in local government decisions concerning redistricting, polling places, early voting access, if it's determined that those decisions could dilute or impair the power of minority voters. And when local governments have the authority to choose where polls and opportunities for early voting or registration are located, it's very easy to see how that power could be used to diminish turnout or make it even more difficult for a protected class to elect a member of their own community. As we've seen and heard referenced about the situation in Baltimore County and the lawsuit that Common Cause Maryland, along with our partners with the Baltimore County NAACP, League of Women's Voters, and ACL of Maryland chose to take on, and were successful. We received an injunction directing that the county should adopt a map that better represents areas where Black and Brown residents make up the majority of voters. We saw a lot of people come out in opposition to this map, and even with their voices were not being heard. And so we think that given the long history of minority voter disenfranchisement, it's very critical that we take the steps to ensure that their voices are being heard and amplified. And since SB 413 will authorize the Attorney General to apply that full weight of federal law, we urge a favorable report. Thank you.
My name is Nola Ansah. I'm the voting rights advocate at Disability Rights Maryland. I think the panel made some really good points, and just to highlight a different angle, currently Black people represent 30% of Baltimore County's population. However, the current redistricting map only allocates one Black majority district out of the total of 7 that makes up Baltimore County. And in addition to that, Black people with disabilities make up 10.5% of the population in Baltimore County. Black people with disabilities face a unique lived experience due to their race and disability, and those two identities will interact and produce a different lived experience. In addition to the historical barriers to voting Black people are still facing, Black voters with disabilities also face additional barriers at the polls, such as inaccessible polling location and undertrained election judges that create negative voting experiences. the redistricting map in Baltimore County adds an additional barrier that attempts to stifle the voice of Black voters with disabilities by diluting the power of their electoral voice to elect candidates that represent their best interests and upholds an unfair power imbalance that contributes to racial inequalities persistent across all sectors of our society. SB 413 is a necessary measure that will ensure the protections of the Voting Rights Act, is realized for historically disenfranchised voters, especially Black voters with disabilities. For these reasons, DRM urges a favorable report on SB 413. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions, Senator Gallion?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Senator, so the way I read this is dealing with county municipal only. Correct. Why not look at the state Senate and delegate races in this?
Because I felt that at the state level, you have the U.S. Attorney that will be able to come in.
Okay, but is there concern that this also happens in state Senate and House of Delegate races the way they're cut up? Isn't that a concern?
Nothing that I was attempting to address, but this before the committee. So I mean, if you all wanted to empower the Attorney General to look at state, it will be up to you all.
Thank you.
Further questions? Seeing none, thank you all.
Thank you very much.
Senator. There are no more oral witnesses, so we will go to the next to last bill of the day, United States Constitution, SJ 8. I'm going to save Senator Lamb. Amendments, Convention, Limitations on Federal Power. We have Senator Reedy. If Michael Riley wants to join him, and then we can just work down the list. Mary Jane Perot and James McQueen, and then we'll work our way down.
Wonderful.
Welcome back, Senator Reedy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, members of the committee. Great to be with you again a few hours later after the last time I was here in the, with you. I'll go ahead and get started. Senator Chairman Pinsky and Vice Chair Kagan, members of the committee, Senator Reedy here for the record to present to you SJ 8, U.S. Constitution Amendments Convention, Limitations on Federal Power. This is the Article 5 bill dealing with us, and I'll get into that a little bit, dealing with us exercising our state legislative authority under Article 5 of the United States Constitution. This resolution is being presented to offer a structural solution to a structural problem. It offers the chance to restore the balance of powers in our federal system by using our state legislative constitutional authority under Article 5 of the United States Constitution. The activities of Washington, D.C. today would have been unimaginable to the founders of our country. Federal laws and regulations now touch upon every aspect of our lives, from what kind of light bulbs we buy, to farming practices, to school curriculum, to health care. Meanwhile, we live under the shadow of a crushing national debt that threatens to envelop our grandchildren and their children. And this has been a bipartisan problem with plenty of blame to go around. This bill, incidentally, has been introduced in the past during both parties' administrations. So I think it's important to point that out before we come here. I've not introduced it before. I have co-sponsored in the past. It's been a bipartisan problem, the issue that we see with national debt and with federal government involvement in our daily lives. In addition, the Supreme Court through past decades has vastly expanded federal power through its precedents with frequently willing accomplices in Congress and the executive branch, again, in both parties. The Supreme Court's created loopholes to the Constitution's limit on federal power, and those loopholes will remain there until someone closes them. By design, that someone is supposed to be us as elected state legislatures. In their wisdom, our founders predicted that this very situation would actually arise over time. Toward the very end of the Constitutional Convention, George Mason specifically predicted that the federal government would one day overpower the states. And they were concerned about that, the founders were, and that's why they insisted that an Article 5 amendment be included, that Article 5 be included as a way for states to propose constitutional amendments through a state-controlled convention. George Mason's proposal was adopted without dissent, and this final version of Article 5 gave the states the ultimate constitutional power, the power to unilaterally amend the Constitution of the United States without the consent of Congress. Now, it's a very high bar to clear. The way it works is 2/3 of state legislatures now 34, pass resolutions applying for a convention to propose amendments on the same topic which serves as the meeting agenda. Each state chooses and instructs its delegation of commissioners who attend the meeting, work with other state delegations to hammer out possible amendment proposals on the topics that were specified by the 34 state applications. Because they act as agents of the state legislature, the commissioners only have legal authority to act pursuant to that specified agenda and only to act in pursuance of their legislature's instructions. Every state gets one vote. Any proposals that are supported by a majority of the states at the convention then go back to the states for ratification. Now, only when 38 states ratify our proposal can it become part of our Constitution. By passing the resolution before you, Maryland would be raising our hand to say, yes, we believe it's time for the states to gather to consider proposing amendments that will rebalance federal power with state power. Specifically, the Article 5 convention, called pursuant to SJ 8, would be limited to 3 topics for amendment proposals. Amendments that impose common sense fiscal discipline on the federal government. Amendments that, again, responsibly limit the power and jurisdiction of the federal government. And amendments that set term limits for federal officials, including or possibly limited to federal judges, as well as department heads. Let me be clear in my comments here today. This does not mean that the convention must propose an amendment on each of these topics. Rather, these topics describe the outer limit of what would be germane to that convention. Now, you might ask, what is my motivation for introducing this legislation now, this year? And I would say for me personally, it's not just because of the central idea of the need to limit and reorder the federal government's hold on local and state governments, although I think that's very important. My motivation for really engaging with this issue for the first time is by watching what's happened in our country, and it's not just in 2020, and really not even just in 2016, but the out-of-control vitriol and lack of trust that has surged in the past decade to 2 decades in national politics. Who is in the White House and who controls Congress has taken on what should be outsized importance, because the federal government's power has surged to the point where one side fears the other will drastically and punitively change the other side's way of life irrevocably. And I believe part of the solution to this rancor is to calm and lower the stakes by purposely restoring the proper balance of power to the government entities closest to the people, more nimble, efficient, responsive in addressing specific day-to-day problems than the federal government is. And we've seen it throughout the entire pandemic. State and local governments are much more able to respond in a targeted fashion. It's just an example. So the Convention of States Action Maryland is an all-volunteer organization. It represents hundreds of volunteers and over 28,000 supporters all across Maryland. Some of them have come to testify today. I would ask you to take to heart what they say, and we ask for a favorable report. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. Is it Riley?
Thank you. Mr. Chair, my name is Michael Riley. I am the State Director for Maryland Convention of States Action, a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization dedicated to rebuilding a culture of self-governance in America. We are over 28,000 Marylanders who have signed up to support our resolution calling for a Convention of States under Article 5 of the U.S. Constitution to discuss and propose constitutional amendments involving a limited set of topics. These are federal fiscal restraint, federal overreach, and term limits for federal officials, including Congress. Our numbers have doubled in the past 2 years because Marylanders are coming to realize that serious challenges require serious tools. And an Article 5 Convention of States is a powerful tool. Once 34 states pass the same resolution, we will have the convention. Any amendments to the Constitution proposed by the convention will have to be ratified by 38 states to actually become part of the Constitution. My colleagues will give more details about why we need the convention and how it works, but I say America is ready for this convention. I believe that a convention of states is the right tool to bring us together as a country. When the convention meets, the whole thing will be put under a microscope. Pundits will argue about every point made during the debate. There will be a tornado of social media activity. America will hold a national discussion about where we are, where we're going, and who we want to be as a country. Given the challenges that we face, this discussion is long overdue. If Massachusetts can pass the resolution to the floor for debate, so can we in Maryland. Please support our resolution calling for an Article 5 Convention of States. And I thank all our supporters who made it here today. Mr. Chair.
Ms. Perot? No?
I'm Leslie Jenkins.
Okay, hold on. Mr. McQueen, are you up there? Please.
I don't know. Go ahead.
Senators, I am James McQueen, Senior, born and raised in Maryland. I'm a Southern Maryland Regional Captain for the Convention of States, speaking for our region's 3,154 supporters. How did we end up here? The Constitution of the United States' sole function was to define the exercise of government and limit governmental powers. History has shown that government bureaucracy adds burdens and limitations on the people. Today, the amended Constitution of the United States is over 3,000 pages. And civil servants, civil authorities, don't pledge to a government, they pledge to the principles of a constitution. Can anyone pledge the oath truly and understand everything in this book, 3,000 pages? What does oath mean to you, to us? We escaped Great Britain's ruling class due to the tyranny, overreach, and religious persecution, and founded the United States of America based on the tenets of freedom from government rule. Now, again, ruling class are killing the free society with malice controlling everything in our culture and government bureaucracy. Today, we see the American flag, and we feel sometimes the owner is a terrorist or an extremist and not a proud patriot. Something's wrong. Don't silence the 28,000 Maryland patriots that are counting on you to hear their fear, their grief, and hope. Please, Southern Maryland, shuck the bureaucracy so our nation can turn from its path of destruction. Why can't you and we stand up for the principles of our Constitution? Vote for SJ 8 to move out of committee onto the floor for an honest debate. Thank you for your time.
I missed your name.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't know that you had called names, but.
No, I didn't,
Okay.
actually. I didn't have his panel marked correctly on my sheet, so.
Okay.
And I should, after that, have Mr. Seth Lipko, if he's here, and then we'll take questions. Please.
Okay, I can go?
Go ahead.
Okay. Good afternoon, Senators. I am Leslie Jenkins, and I'm a Maryland volunteer for the Convention of States. Article 5 was given to the citizens of this nation as a tool to be used when the government has become despotic. Our founders said that this method of amending the Constitution will probably never be resorted to unless the federal government should betray symptoms of corruption. Symptoms don't even begin to describe the problems our nation has right now. You have to be willfully ignorant to not see the corruption and the progression into a socialist country that we have become. Or maybe you do, and this is exactly what you would like to see happen. Article 5 is to be used and at our disposal instead of a last-minute ditch effort to expedient measures to try and rein in the federal government once it has crossed the barrier of no return. If this occurs, we would then be at the mercy of some radical and ineffectual measures that have no guarantee to retain our freedoms. I applaud the founders in their wisdom to provide this safe and peaceable measure by calling for a convention of states. The abuse of power, when allowed to go unchecked, brings about greed and corruption as we are seeing today. Article 5 is the remedy. This is indeed one of the greatest beauties of the system, and it should strongly be recommended to every candid mind to understand the wisdom behind Article 5. The Constitution of any government, which cannot be regularly amended, when it has gone off the rails, reduces the people to two dilemmas. One is they either submit to the oppressions, or two, they bring about amendments, more or less by a civil war. The Convention of States and its petition signers have seen the progression towards the destruction of our country. We are educating ourselves on the lack of leadership to maintain and secure our rights.
Our leaders are choosing to follow a communist doctrine that is enriching their lives instead of retaining our liberty. To do that, they have to take their self-governing power from the people and the states so that they can be the only reigning authority. We are trying to avoid the radical remedy and be proactive with a peaceful remedy.
Thank you.
Which our Constitution gives us through Article 5.
Thank you. We'll go to Mr. Lipko, if you want to take a seat, and then we'll take questions for that first panel.
I am Seth Lipko. I live in District 32, and I represent about 650 other supporters in my district. I've invested my personal time in the Convention of States movement because of my children and my concern for their future. I want my kids to grow up in a better world than I was raised in, with brighter futures and more bountiful opportunities. And I'm sure all of you do too. What I've seen in the area of financial freedom isn't just stagnation, but digression from that goal as a result of the fiscal irresponsibility of the federal government. As you heard earlier, this isn't a partisan issue. Regardless of which party has a majority, we the people are at the mercy of their expensive ambitions. With each passing administration, their agenda takes priority over economic stability, and it's at the expense of the hard-earned incomes of families like mine. The answer is not increased taxation. We can't spend ourselves out of debt. The answer is not more federal assistance programs. They cost hundreds of millions, and they result in our greater dependence on their existence. I mean, how's Social Security looking right about now? I hope all of you will be able to benefit from my contributions into that broken program, because I sure won't. So what's the answer? It's you putting fiscal restraints on them. Every average American family has to learn how to budget and prioritize their needs as a basic survival skill. Every business has to do the same in order to stay open and to profit. It's time the feds start holding that same responsibility as the people who have to fund their irresponsibility. They've had decades to fix this problem, and they continue heading in the wrong direction. They have to be held accountable. You, this committee, the Senate of Maryland, hold that power constitutionally to enforce that accountability. And as our representatives, I ask you to support a Convention of States to impose fiscal restraint on the U.S. government. For the sake of our children and grandchildren who are already in bondage to the accumulating federal debt, we must put an end to this irresponsibility. Please move SJ8 out of committee and be part of the solution. Thank you.
Okay, we'll take questions. We're going to have one person respond to the question. We're not going to have 6 people. Senator Gallion first.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Senator, for bringing this. This also concerns some of the young children of the ballooning national debt we have. You know, we haven't had no debt, I think, since Andrew Jackson was president, and probably hadn't had a balanced budget since the Clinton-Newt Gingrich years. So my question, so with this convention, you mentioned the 3 different things that you could talk about. So would one priority be a balanced budget amendment?
That I think is the goal of many involved in this movement, is balanced budget amendment. I think there would be flexibility to discuss other types of restraints that would fall short of totally balanced budget. You'd have to, obviously, we know that there are times where you have to borrow money for different things.
Like for a war or natural disasters.
The stated goal, I think, is to have a balanced budget amendment, but I think you'd have to, I think that's why you get everybody together and you say, let's talk about what makes sense fiscally so that we do not end up in further and further debt year after year. But obviously, I'm sure you need to have some, we know that we have to have some flexibility at the federal level for certain things. So I think that's part of the beauty of the convention system, is that you would be able to discuss that.
Okay, thank you. And we have a balanced budget at the state every year, so that'd be great if we could work to that at the federal level. Thank you.
Senator Carrozza.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Senator Reedy, thank you for introducing this. And I also want to thank all of those involved with the Convention of States Action Maryland. I know we've had this issue before us in the past, but I have to tell you, this year, I thought it was really crystallized on the 3 points, the focus on what the amendments would be. I've heard from at least 150 of my constituents, I think, very concerned about the power of the federal government. So my question is, and this would be addressed to the senator, I see the 3 areas for the amendment proposals. Obviously, Senator Gallion just kind of focused on the balanced budget amendment, which I think has been a priority of this group in the past. But I specifically wanted to ask you about those amendments limiting the power and jurisdiction of the federal government, especially, I think, in light where a lot of questions were raised coming out of the pandemic. But I didn't know if there were any, again, we've talked about the fiscal discipline, but on these limits of the power and jurisdiction of the federal government, if there was any areas that the you or the Convention of States Action have focused on, or if it was more, a general limitation of the federal government.
I think that's part of the goal is to discuss what parts that had been left to the states more originally have now been overtaken by federal action. What's the appropriate safeguard for that? I think some later testimony may give some insight to that. I know that the folks that are speaking have...
Senator Reedy, could you, speak in the microphone?
I know that some of the folks that are speaking behind me have really coordinated their testimony to try to emphasize different aspects of it. I think the goal is to see there be, again, more of a limited national federal government focused on key priorities and leaving things to the states that are that are more germane to the states and to local government. So I think you'll probably hear more about that as the testimony unfolds today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Other questions for this panel? Just one, Senator Reedy. Would a balanced budget amendment reverse the tax cut of 1718 under the former president that saw the deficit increase by $113 billion and tax receipts fall by $90 billion when the tax cut by the former president increased the deficit pretty substantially? I mean, would it reverse that tax cut?
Well, it very well might. Look, I think spending money increases deficits. So, I mean, I think we could point the finger at a lot of folks on why the deficit is so high and why our debt is so high. It may. Certainly, you have to balance your spending with your taxes, with your tax revenue. I'm not sure. I might question your numbers on the economy seemed to be roaring pretty good up until the pandemic. So I'm not sure whether I take your numbers at face value, but we could debate that later. But no, I think it could. Look, it would impose fiscal discipline, whichever way you want to look at it.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks. We'll go to the next panel. We will go with Mary Jane Perot, Coley Brown, Gail McCowan, and Carrie Wolford. And they will be followed by Elliot Weekly, Nicole Weekly, Robert Fisher, and Cody Tristan White. Please.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm Mary Jane Perot, a volunteer with the Convention of States, trying to preserve the freedoms that I've always taken for granted. 28,000 conscientious Marylanders and I hope that all members of this committee agree that the country's in trouble. As a volunteer, it was sobering to speak to several first-generation immigrants who wondered if they'd made a mistake coming to the United States. They said the U.S. is similar to the communist country they left, including censoring speech, growing crime, outright corruption, and spiraling debt. It's alarming to see the federal government take such sweeping measures and wasting billions to try to solve all problems for all people. That's not the role of the federal government. And as state legislators, you're more closely aware of our needs and how to best allocate resources in our communities, and yet you're becoming less relevant. We want to give the power back to you where it belongs through a convention of states. We're losing our economic freedom. Imagine a stack of dollar bills from here to the moon. Now, imagine 9 stacks of bills. That's our national debt, $30 trillion. It's astronomical. In fact, the ratio of debt to GDP is more than after World War II. And if this continues unchecked, financial default is inevitable, and it will devastate the freedoms of generations to come, who will be punished by our inactions. Do you really think Congress will reduce spending on its own? I think we can all agree this won't happen without an Article 5 Convention of States, which gives us not only the right, but an obligation to act. It's time to act, to determine your own fate, the fate of Maryland, and that of our country. Please vote favorably on SJ 8. Thank you.
Thank you. Coley Brown?
Hello, committee members. My name is Coley Brown. I live in District 36, where I represent 1,327 supporters as their Convention of States captain. I want a floor debate on SJ 8 to have Maryland participate in a national convention of states. This will allow Maryland a voice on the three topics of federal overreach, fiscal responsibility, and term limits. These are popular topics with Maryland voters. They are popular nationally, where 17 states have already agreed to participate in a convention of states to discuss these. Let me clarify why. The Convention of States is nonpartisan. This is not the first convention of states, nor is it without precedent. Our Bill of Rights, something we're all familiar with, came from the first. The convention is not chartered to pass any constitutional amendments. You have that right. The convention will only have authority to discuss these topics. If the convention agrees and recommends any, they go back to you, our representatives, and state legislatures to consider approving. Further, the constitutional amendments to be accepted, 3/4 of all the 50 state legislatures need to adopt an agreement. If only part of an individual state's legislature disagrees, then that state will not vote and endorse the amendment which has been recommended. Most importantly, if Maryland refuses to participate and attend a convention, your voters' voices and your opinions will not be heard. I implore you not to censure this debate. 28,000 of your voters have asked for a simple action and are watching for a direct result. Please let SJ 8 come to the floor to debate its merits and its detractions and flaws. Thank you very much for your time.
I am Gail McCowan, and I am a Baltimore City resident within Senator Ferguson's District 46, a one-year volunteer with the Convention of States, and I'm a retired Lieutenant Colonel of the U.S. Army. Service members who take an oath to the Constitution truly understand the meaning of service to something greater than themselves. This virtue is long lost on career politicians in Washington who exhibit little to no desire to serve their constituents. And I didn't spend 21 years serving this great country to spend the rest of my time saving it from power-hungry politicians. The federal government has become much larger than the founding fathers intended. New committees, new commissions, new policies, new agencies, new regulations, and with each new initiative comes the need for funding, while creating new solutions to old problems, when many of those problems could be solved right here at the state level. Marylanders believe this too. Our petition numbers are steadily growing within the state, and I have attended many events representing the Convention of States this past year, and Maryland citizens are talking, and they are disgusted and ready to exercise Article 5 for Maryland and for the people of Maryland who are tired of supporting federal politicians who don't support their desires and fail to represent them once they are elected. If we, the people, can't get our federally elected politicians to work on our behalf, nor hold them accountable, then the check and balance answer for the people is Article 5 of the U.S. Constitution. So as a supporter and participant within the Convention of States, then the state of Maryland would then have the ability to address limitations on out-of-control federal overreach.
For your service to our nation. We're glad you're here. Ms. Wolford, good to see you again.
Yes, thank you. Hello, I'm Carrie Wolford from District 1. Service to our country runs deep on both sides of my family. My generational grandfather, Michael Paw, crossed the Delaware River with George Washington along with his brother Meshach Paw. While fighting in the Revolutionary War, they also camped at Valley Forge. The sacrifice they made to this country is still within my soul. I think about the stories I hear about the conditions of our soldiers at Valley Forge. The soldiers were starving for lack of food. If they even had shoes at all, they were riddled with holes. Their uniforms were torn and tattered and not appropriate for long, cold winters. No blankets to keep them warm, and sickness was all around. Many of the soldiers froze to death. They were willing to sacrifice their lives in order for freedom. They were at times not receiving just compensation for their service. So at the end of the war, George Washington made sure that they were given parcels of land in Garrett County. I will cherish that land until I die. Most of the men in my immediate family also served in the military. I do not take the sacrifice for granted, and that is why I volunteer with Convention of States. It is the solution that is as big as the problem. My family was always willing to shed blood for our inalienable rights, not for a bureaucracy to take them away with a stroke of a pen. They fought for the right to self-govern, to earn our own way. Many Marylanders are in the movement to preserve our freedoms and to use Article 5 of our Constitution. We want to know whether you are willing to stand with us. We do not want you to sacrifice our state or our rights and hand over your power to some crazy agenda in Washington, D.C. We once united against the British in the Revolutionary War. We were united in calling the late Federal Convention. We need to unite again, now, for the peace and happiness of America before it is too late. As a descendant of generations who were willing to give everything they had so that you could have liberty and you could have the right to your individual pursuits of happiness, I am asking that you vote favorable on Resolution SJ8. Thank you.
Weekly and Nicholas Weekly. You all can come forward, followed by Robert Fisher. Those are the next three witnesses. Thank you all for being here. So may I just say that as you come forward, we appreciate your presence here, and we appreciate your sharing your voices, your opinions, and we may or may not ever agree on stuff, but we're glad that you're here, and you help us do our jobs better. So thank you. Elliot Weekly, followed by Nicole Weekly.
Hello, I am Elliot Weekly. I am in 6th grade and live in Hollywood, Maryland, but I have not always lived here. My dad is in the military and we used to move around a lot. In fact, I lived in 4 different states by the time I was 5. We don't have to move around much anymore, but when we did, it could be hard. When I was little, most of the time it was just me and my mom. Moving away from friends, having to spend birthdays apart, and missing my dad was not easy. They say that being a military kid makes you tough, and I can see that, but I am grateful we are here in Maryland and my dad does not deploy. I've learned about American government in school and just wrote an essay about federalism for the Convention of States Maryland Essay Contest. Learning about federalism was interesting. Our government was designed to split power between branches of government as well as levels of government. This was done to make sure that no one person became too powerful and so that the states were able to make decisions with their people. Unfortunately, we've kind of messed it up. Right now, the federal government and the president are making a lot of decisions that impact a lot of people in really bad ways. My parents do not want me to worry about this, but I know my dad is currently fighting taking the vaccine. He is a Marine and his job is to protect the Constitution. The First Amendment of the Constitution protects your right to practice your religion, and that right should not be taken away from you just because you're in the military. My parents also don't want me to worry about what's happening with Ukraine, but that is hard to. My family is Ukrainian, and my aunt and uncle are actually stationed in Germany. Uncle Brett has an important job in the Army and deployed a lot to Afghanistan, and I worry about him having to go back to war. Until this summer, America was at war my entire life. I don't want friends, family, and I to go through it all again. I am testifying today because I know you're supposed to listen to me. I learned about the Convention of States when I learned about federalism, and that it will help more people get their ideas out there. And I think having people have more say in government is a good thing.
Thank you, Elliot. Thank you so much. Elliot, you did a great job. Thank you so much for being with us. Maybe someday you'll be on this side. No clapping, you guys, sorry. Really appreciate the American Sign Language clapping, though. That's awesome. We appreciate that. Following up, Nicole Weekly. Is that Mom?
Yeah.
Welcome. You should be very proud of your daughter.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
All right. My name is Dr. Nicole Weekly, and last year I voiced my concerns for the growing irresponsibility of government, fearing that if left unchecked, we were on a path toward destruction similar to the country that my family fled from. This concern has increased over this last year, and frankly, we're approaching a time I fear that we cannot turn back. Over the last 15 years, I've worked with children across home, school, and clinic settings with leading nonprofits and universities in our nation. As a scientist practitioner who cares deeply about education policies, I believe that SJ8 is a long-standing solution to the heart of the issue. Children, particularly those in marginalized populations, have often been described as canaries in the coal mine because negative outcomes will show in them first, and it is up to us to quickly adjust policy. I have never before experienced the despondency that I'm seeing in a field of mental health and education. The top-down policies that have come from Washington for generations have created a cascade of tertiary or secondary and tertiary effects that impact, without fail, those who are most at risk. This has never been more evident than during the last 2 years, where education and intervention services have been desecrated, while referrals for mental health and issues are through the roof. I'm now fielding concerns for suicidal ideation in children who are as young as 8. The CDC data in 2020 indicates that suicide was the second leading cause of death in ages 9 to 14, and children between the ages of 9 and 19 were 18 times more likely to die from self-harm than they were from COVID. Yet our recent child health policies are entirely myopic and void of data-based decision-making. I joined this bipartisan effort to enact Article 5 because even though our system is struggling, we still have the ability to course correct. We know that focused, individualized interventions lead to the greatest results for our clients, and I would argue that is the same in politics. Strong relationships between the elected and their constituents lead to greater results for people in communities, and it's time we bring the governing back to you here at the state. Thank you.
Robert Fisher.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Senators. I am Bob Fisher, Navy veteran and Veterans Coalition Director for the Convention of States, Maryland. I understand some of you are also veterans. Thank you very much for your service. I represent approximately 1,500 fellow Maryland veteran voters who signed our Convention of States petition. According to recent polls, about 75% of the U.S. voters support congressional term limits. The 22nd Amendment was established for presidential term limits, but did not limit legislative and judicial terms. Today, 15 U.S. Congress members are currently serving over 36 years. In 2022, the longest-serving Supreme Court justice has been serving for 30 years. 60% of the Senate and 40% of the Congress are over 65 years of age. Why should this frighten you? Well, according to the Harvard Health Organization, the chance of developing dementia increases 6% each year after age 65. Longer political tenures lead to stagnation, resistance to change, and obligations to special interests. In my opinion, we need to limit both chambers to 12-year terms. When it comes to adjusting term limits, the Congress needs to police itself. But do we truly believe that we can trust Congress to give up their biggest gravy train? In conclusion, esteemed senators, if we don't control this overreach, who will? You are the catalyst to initiate it, to make it happen. Please support SJ8 and favorably vote it out of committee for a full debate and a recorded up or down vote. Thank you very much for your valued time.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. The next panel is going to be Cody Tristan White, Deirdre Elvis Peterson, and Jennifer Brown. Colleagues, we have like one more panel if they squish together a little bit. All right, Cody Tristan White, Deirdre Elvis Peterson, Jennifer Brown. Take a seat and you can go in any order. Please begin.
My name is Cody. I am 10 years old and I'm from Mechanicsville, Maryland. You're probably thinking and asking yourselves, what is a 10-year-old doing here today? What does he know about governance and passing laws? Well, I am here today to support Bill SJ8. A couple of weeks ago, I won an essay about what is federalism and why did the framers and founders create such a government system for America. The Founding Fathers built America to have freedom from the excessive power of the monarchy of England. The founders and framers made sure that a government system would work to protect the people's rights and freedom. The Constitution was written and federalism was born in America. Federalism is the separation of power between the state and federal government, with the Constitution as the supreme law of the land. This way, the state and federal governments will not have too much power over the other. This country is a democratic republic, a hybrid system between democratic and republic government systems. The founders and framers wanted the best out of these two systems, with the purpose of protecting the rights of people as the number one priority. Why? Because without people, there is no government. Today, we children mostly hear and read news about Biden versus Trump, Democrats versus Republicans, war, inflation, corruption. It's all about pointing fingers. We children do not want self-serving politicians. We do not want war. We want good education and great leaders to teach us. You are our leaders. You are our examples. I humbly ask you, Senators, please support SJ8. Please do not forget what our founding fathers and framers set out to do. Do not let our federal government go unchecked. Protect us, your children, your future. Thank you.
Thank you, Cody. Good job. Deirdre Elvis Peterson.
Good afternoon. My name is Deirdre Elvis Peterson. I'm a naturalized American citizen, emigrated from Guyana, South America, at the age of 6 with my 3 siblings, our parents, and grandmother. My parents actually left their 4 children for 2 years in order to seek out the promise of a better life offered in the United States of America before our grandmother flew here with us. That was 1980. In my time growing up here, I learned how the American government was supposed to work. It was a unique design. There were measures put in place, checks and balances. Over the past few years, I've become a parent. Something changes with that responsibility. I began to pay attention in a different way. Other parents will understand. I started to see things I did not like for my children's future. For instance, I went to public school but couldn't send my children there due to the degradation of the public school system. I went to college but shudder at the thought of my children doing so because of the debt they would incur, the propaganda I feel is being pushed, and the lack of safety for my 3 daughters in what used to be their exclusive spaces. I grew up in Maryland, and sadly, I fear I may have to relocate to a state where the legislature will actively work to protect my freedoms. I've witnessed our federal government exercise powers that it should not be able to. I've witnessed lifetime politicians use their seats for their benefit, not that of their constituents. And some of these politicians have been in office as long or longer than I have been alive. That is disturbing. I've seen our national debt grow to something that generations to come will be struggling to pay off. I've seen states cooperate with the federal government to the detriment of their citizens because of the promise of federal funding. Hospitals were unable to make individualized care decisions and use their expertise during this pandemic because of the ties to federal funds. It is and continues to be appalling. Our government needs reeling in. We turn to our state legislatures to do the jobs they were elected to do. By voting favorable on this joint resolution, please vote favorable on SJ8.
Thank you, Ms. Elvis Peterson. Thank you for your testimony. Jennifer Brown.
My name is Jennifer Brown, and I'm an adjunct political science instructor and a Convention of States volunteer for District 35. In 1 year, I've watched a dramatic shift in the political ideology amongst my students. Once supporters of centralized federalism, I see them shifting their views pretty significantly. I hear stories of job loss due to vaccine mandates and businesses being shut down. I hear about the cost of gas, retail items, and food, and the effect it has on students working and attending school simultaneously. In 2018, this body passed legislation that funds tuition at state community colleges, but if the federal government forces prices so high that students have to choose between school and work, what effect is legislation that gives them something they'll never use? Your work for the citizens of Maryland is being erased by poor policy decision-making at the federal level. Those same students are worried about completing degrees in fields where they can no longer work. They ask what happened to their right to work and their right to make their own choices. Students are surprisingly unified on this topic regardless of party affiliation. What they see happening at the federal level is awakening them, and they are paying attention and anxious for their opportunity to vote. They don't want the United States to become a nation where freedom is trampled and economic prosperity ceases. Like my students, I want to see something done to curtail federal overreach. As a former legislative aide here in Annapolis, I have seen that process work. Each one of you is far more inclined to listen to your constituents than any federal representative. All powers not granted to the federal government are reserved to you or to the people. As Maryland representatives, you have both the jurisdiction and the obligation to exercise those powers. And that is why I want you to support SJ 8. This convention is vital to restoring the proper balance of federalism. Article 5 allows you to play a pivotal role in calling for a convention to pass comprehensive amendments limiting the power and scope of the federal government, thus returning power to the states where it belongs. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. The next witnesses will be Will Zwart. Cody, good luck to you. Take care. Will Zwart, Stephen Patton, Robert Betts, and Richard Bibby. If the fourth one, maybe Mr. Bibby can stay on the front row or something, but the other three can come forward. Or if you're comfortable, you can all be in the, since there are 4 chairs there, you can also do that. Whatever is your comfort level. Whoever sits down first can start first. Welcome to, that's hilarious. Come on, David, take it. No, Stephen. All right. I'm sorry. Questions? Yes, afterwards, yes, thank you. Thank you for the questions, Senator Croza. All right, let's see. So I don't know who we're missing, but let's start. I think, Stephen, I know you, right?
Yes, I was going to follow up at the end, but I can go if you'd like me to.
Whatever is your preference, please just begin. Will Zwart is the next one who's signed up. Mr. Zwart, go for it.
All right, well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'll be brief. I'm Will Zwart. I live in Queen Anne's County, and I'm here today to bring to your attention a real and imminent threat. Everything we own, our futures, our families, our freedom, and our lives are being threatened right now. Not by any foreign enemy, but by our own federal government. The extremists in Washington have made it abundantly clear through mandates, federal supremacy, judicial activism, and even forceful intimidation that they do not want to represent America. They want to rule it. They don't want 50 states. They don't want 50 state legislatures. You've experienced this. Over 75% of the decisions made by the federal government should legally and lawfully be made by state legislatures. But Washington will never defer to the wisdom of the states because they don't trust you. Haven't they said already that, quote, state legislatures are blocking our progress? So either because you're in the minority or simply because you have the same letter next to your name that they do, they say you have to fall in lockstep. Well, Article 5 of the U.S. Constitution says you don't, and they know it. And they are desperately trying to divide us and suppress us because they're afraid that when we realize the power we have, we will wield that power and take back our country. From Georgia to Massachusetts, states are realizing this truth, that a convention of states will increase the power of the people, your power, and decrease that of those who seek to control you. This resolution will gain you back the wealth, authority, and respect that is legally and lawfully yours. You have a rare opportunity to cement yourselves in history as the heroes who saved America. Don't let it slip away. It is time for both sides of the aisle to unite against these intolerant federal thugs who are trying to destroy the aisle. I charge you to approve this resolution and bring it to the floor so that we might preserve liberty. Because make no mistake, once they've taken all my freedom, they're coming for yours. Thank you.
Again, in any order. Mr. Patton, if you want to go last, then Mr. Betts or Mr. Bibby, whoever you are, please.
I'm Mr. Betts.
Thank you.
My name is Bob, and I live in District 9, along with 781 other voters in Maryland who want you to call for a convention to propose amendments to the United States Constitution. According to the Maryland Manual Online, this committee reviews legislation on a variety of topics, including agriculture, fire prevention, and school policy, but not on calls for amendments conventions. Because of that, I and 28,000 other Marylanders ask you to hear our testimony and then pass SJ 8 to the full Senate for a discussion and vote. Now I'd like to discuss a piece of disinformation I feel the Senate should hear debunked. That's the claim that there are no rules for how to run a convention of states. That's almost true. The Constitution doesn't have rules for how to do anything. It's a framework, not a cookbook. The Constitution creates a Congress and gives it lawmaking power and tasks the president with executing those laws. Speaker of the House, Senate Majority Leader, and executive orders aren't mentioned, but we've got them all. Some days they seem like a good idea. The Constitution says we need a Supreme Court, but that's pretty much it. To quote constitutional scholar David Barton, John Roberts at a card table with a candle meets the constitutional requirement for a Supreme Court. And yet we've got a Supreme Court, and it rivets our national attention for weeks every time we elect a president. Maybe a few rules would have been a good idea there. Getting back to amendments, Congress has proposed amendments 33 times, and states have adopted them 27 times, without any constitutional guidance, and the same authority granted to the states just 2 commas, 2 spaces, and 2 letters later. So what rules does the Constitution expect us to use? The same ones we always used before. The framers were well aware of how to make laws, how courts operate, and how to hold conventions of states. You're hearing testimony today about multiple conventions of states that we've already held in the U.S. The one we're asking you to call today will do the same thing, the same way, one more time. Good afternoon.
Thank you, Mr. Batts. Could you please cover your nose?
Oh, sorry.
That would be great. We appreciate it. So is that Mr. Bibby who's coming up
Yes.
now? All right. You get the Best Dressed Award for the day.
Thank you.
All right.
Yeah.
Welcome to the Senate. You may begin your testimony.
Fellow Marylanders, I need you, and I need you today. Myself and Rick Bibby of Leitersburg, Maryland, need you to join us in a bipartisan effort to save our state and our country from its own procrastinating self by approving SJ8. Today, speaking for myself and Rick, and over 1,100 petition signers from District 2 in Western Maryland, I and many others watching online hope to address those of you that might object to or have qualms about an Article 5 Convention of States even being held. Some of you will say that we'll be unleashing a Pandora's box upon our country and it will destroy everything that's long been held sacred. I stand against that claim, believing that our founders built in the Article 5 Convention to allow us to make needed corrections to save our union from the selfishness and the stalemates of blind partisanship. If I still believed in my heart of hearts that our elected U.S. House and Senate members would make these changes on their own, I would not be asking to testify here today. This same desire to be heard was once heard in 1776 by 56 regular citizens with an average age of just 45, and not one of those 56 could ever have been called a statesman. Yet they found the courage to believe in something much bigger than themselves, and they put it all in writing in less than 7,000 words. I now better understand the way they felt in 1776, and I'm asking you to allow the voices of everyday Marylanders to be heard on this matter, to shape a positive future for generations of Americans yet to come by simply focusing on the founders' immortal 7,000 words and not get lost in the current version of 1.4 million words. You can allow that to happen. This government of, by, and for the people must live on forever, and your committee's bipartisan support of this Article 5 and will help do that. And we need you to do that right now. By simply rating SJ8 as favorable for floor debate, you'll be standing with a groundswell of 28,000 Marylanders and millions of Americans nationwide. I need you. Our state needs you. Our nation needs you. It needs us, and it needs all of us, and it needs us now. It's not what I do nor what you do. What truly matters is when we do it together and we restore unity to our country.
Thank you, Mr. Bibby. And wrapping up, Mr. Patton, Stephen Patton.
Good afternoon, Madam Vice Chairman, members of the committee. Thank you for your service to our state and your constituents. I am Steve Patton, a resident of Carroll County, where I run my small business and I raise my family. For the past 4 years, I've had the great honor of volunteering alongside fellow Marylanders, a very small fraction of which you have heard from here today. As a Convention of States Maryland volunteer, I've spoken to hundreds, more likely thousands, of Marylanders that are upset with our out-of-control federal government. They feel that the federal government has no interest in their opinion, that they have been left without a voice, that they are being governed without their consent. When Convention of State volunteers are not spending their time preparing to impress upon committee members in the Senate the importance of adding Maryland to the 17 states already calling for an Article 5 Convention of States, we are educating our fellow citizens about our great country's founding principles and documents. I think an important part of why the Convention of States Maryland movement has grown to over 28,000 supporters is recognizing that the second clause of Article 5 of our Constitution is there so that the people, we the people, have a path to put an out-of-control federal government back in a constitutionally constrained box, a box the states that formed this federal government intended it to reside. Working alongside fellow Maryland Convention of States volunteers and supporters is thoroughly inspiring and a true honor. I ask the members of the committee to please take to heart the testimonies that you have heard here today, given by your fellow Maryland citizens. Not paid lobbyists, not experts, just regular citizens that love their country. And please remember that you are only hearing from a very small fraction of our hundreds of active volunteers and tens of thousands of supporters here in Maryland. At this time, I'd like to request, Madam Vice Chair, that our volunteers and supporters that came from all over the state of Maryland here to Annapolis today, could they please stand and be recognized?
Absolutely, absolutely. Please feel free to stand up. Thank you. We're really glad you're here. Thank you very much, you guys. Love it. Thank you. Appreciate you.
Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Absolutely.
Madam Vice Chairman.
Yeah, that's all right. When I'm in the chair, it's kind of, yeah, that's protocol. That's all good. It's all good. But Senator Pinsky is the chair, to be clear. Okay, so we're going to take a few questions, and let me just say before we do, we all love our country, and so one of the great things about living in a democracy, and we know what's going on across the world here, but we're allowed to agree to disagree, and we can be respectful. And most of you all have been that, and for that, I thank you. Not everyone, but a lot of you have. The second thing is that I know that we are all just done with masks, and they're annoying, and they're hard to breathe, and they're uncomfortable, and all that. And so I appreciate that, and we all appreciate, because we've got to wear these things all day, all night, and it's dreadful every day. And so we really appreciate your respect for our health and safety, as we appreciate yours in keeping fully masked. So, and we're really grateful to the troopers who keep us safe and who have helped to enforce that today. So really want to thank you all. But mostly, we also just really want to thank you for being here. And with that, I'll start with Senator Carrozza.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. Ms. Brown could return to the dais. I want to, first of all, I want to thank all of the volunteers and all the people that came from all over the state. And I also want to say how impressed I am with your organization in presenting it, because this is truly the first time I think it's been so clearly stated and laid out. And I know what you're asking us is for us to keep an open mind. So thank you. And I actually, yeah, I'm glad to support this and glad to co-sponsor it. My question is for Ms. Brown, because I was listening to your experience as a mother, as a political science instructor, and also your previous experience here. So you bring a really unique perspective. And I actually I read the Federalist Papers. That was what I studied in school. So you were jogging my memory here. But I wanted to ask you, in your testimony, you seem to talk about maybe what you experienced here and then what you're doing now as a political instructor, kind of a shifting and a sense of urgency of what you've seen in the past and what you see now. And I just wanted to know if there were certain areas. Was it just, just more and more control at the federal level and kind of a push like the states really need to step up? Can you just expand on that?
Yes, I can. I've been teaching for about 11 years as an adjunct political science instructor, and what I have seen is that, a lot of students were not very aware of what their government did, and maybe not even very interested in what their government did, and very supportive of a lot of more federalized policies. But what I'm seeing now is, and really I can say this is a really dramatic shift in the last year or so. What I'm seeing is that students are, they're much more aware, they're much more willing to speak out, and they don't like the fact that they feel that the federal government is inhibiting their future. And again, I think I mentioned in my testimony, things like vaccine mandates, businesses shutting down because they're losing their jobs. They can't pay for gas. They can't pay for food like they could before. So they're having to make a difficult decision between going to school and working. And a lot of them are having to opt to work because they have to survive. And I think that's unfortunate because, you know, you all have done such a good job in trying to help them with tuition and help them in things that they need at the state level, but they're not being able to utilize those things because the things that are coming down from the federal
I understand that, and
government.
I appreciate that. So I guess I'm saying they do differentiate between what's going on at the federal level and
Yes.
what's going on at the
Yes, they
state level.
definitely do.
Okay.
They are specifically mentioning that they can see that these things that are being passed down from the federal level that they're having a problem with at this
And they
point.
want us to deal with these issues.
Yes.
Thank you.
Rosa? I see no other questions from colleagues. So again, I want to thank everybody who traveled from around the state. Thank you for being with us. Thank you for your activism. And be in touch with your legislators and make sure that you vote. Like, we live in a democracy still, so do that. Stay safe and healthy and get home safely. Take care. Thank you, Senator Reedy. That completes the hearing on Senate Senate Joint Resolution number 8. And the last bill is Senator Lamb, Senate Bill 570, Public Ethics, okay. You guys, if you can leave a little quietly so we can continue our business, please. Guys, we have another bill yet, if you could possibly leave quietly. You're welcome to stay and watch this bill, or if you're leaving, if you could do so quietly, we'd be grateful. Senate Bill 570, Senator Lamb, Public Ethics, former Secretary, Deputy Secretary, or Assistant Secretary of a Principal Department, Employment Restrictions. Senator Lamb.
Let me give him a second to exit. All right, last bill of the afternoon. So, good afternoon, Chair, Vice Chair, members of the committee. For the record, Clarence Lamb, Senator District 12. Senate Bill 570 is a bill meant to enhance Maryland's public ethics statutes to prohibit a former Deputy Secretary or Assistant Secretary of a Principal Department from engaging in legislative activities, lobbying, following their departure from public service. This bill also adds a restriction that will prohibit the previously mentioned officials, in addition to the department secretaries, from obtaining employment from entities that were subject to contractual interactions within 1 year prior to these officials leaving state government. These provisions are meant to enhance pre-existing lobbying restrictions to reduce the potential or even the appearance of conflicts of interest in determining state business for contracts as a result of possible opportunities of future employment. I think that, in other words, I think that this should help ensure that secretaries make decisions based on merit and the public need rather than on potential future employment. And this bill creates a stronger arm's length provision to minimize any actual or even the appearance of a conflict of interest. Ultimately, whether an individual is elected by the public or appointed to an office, it is the duty of a public official to create policies that fulfill duties that serve the public's interests. However, as long as loopholes might potentially exist in public ethics statutes, public officials could be vulnerable to the influence of incentives, whether actual, inferred, implied, perceived, or otherwise, offered by entities they engage with while in office to secure a future position outside of state government. Most often, this has been associated with lobbying, but there are more ways that secretaries or other departmental leaders can benefit from their public service beyond just lobbying. This legislation is aimed at curtailing the possibility of a revolving door between leaders of our state agencies and departments and the contractors that these departments do business with. The ethical concerns of intertwining business interests with government action have become more abundantly clear. The recent events of the COVID-19 pandemic afford a good example of the need to have better protections and safeguards in place. Throughout the public health crisis, various departments and their leaders have negotiated contracts of millions of dollars in taxpayer money to secure contracts, services, personnel, and equipment. While some of these well-publicized contracts have been controversial, this bill is just focused on making sure that the potential of future employment with a contract recipient does not unduly influence the executive-level decisions that are being made. Even the appearance of a potential conflict of interest can be troubling to the public, and that's why this safeguard helps ensure that the public will not question executive decisions after they're made. Compared to numerous other states, Maryland's current ethics statutes could be strengthened. In my written testimony, I've linked to a NCSL, National Conference of State Legislatures, breakdown of ethics statutes that demonstrates that Maryland's existing protections are not as strong as those from some other states. Many states define public official in ways that are broader, which subject these individuals to the same prohibitions on lobbying that already currently exist in the Maryland statute for the governor, members of the General Assembly, the comptroller, the treasurer, and the secretaries of principal units of state government. This bill will add deputy secretary and assistant secretaries of those principal departments to the prohibitions against lobbying within 1 year of departure from the state government. And the bill will also further limit the ability of businesses, potential contractors and vendors, or even special interest groups involved with state government to be able to influence public officials via future or potential incentives that relate to activities of future employment. SB 570 would prohibit secretaries, deputy secretaries, and like that participated in determining business contracts of sales of $5,000 or more from employment with them in the year after they leave office of their state position. New Mexico and Washington State have similar statutes that accomplish the same aim of prohibiting their government from engaging in relations with a contractual entity that is now associated with the former official who at the time of public service was privy to the contractual business that took place. So by expanding Maryland's public ethics statutes, Senate Bill 570 bolsters public confidence in the stewardship of taxpayer dollars in our state contracts, and ensures that we remove from any consideration any concern of a potential conflict of interest by our highest ranking state officials, so that there's no question that they're engaging in state business and outside contracts without consideration to future personal benefit through potential opportunities for future employment. And so this is from my opinion, it's a simple, good government bill, and I urge the committee to consider this for a favorable report.
Are there questions for yes, Senator Carosa?
Thank you. Thank you, Senator Lamb, and I think we're all for good government bills, but my question is just, do you know if this legislation or similar legislation was introduced during Governor O'Malley's administration or when a Democrat was in office?
I do not. I did not go back in that level of legislative history, but would take note that this bill takes effect October 1st and would carry forward to any administration, whoever's in office. And I think it is a good government bill that should be applicable to, whatever party the administration is in office. And so, whoever's in office next, it will take effect, and if we pass it and apply to them.
I understand that sometimes timing is curious. Thank you.
Well, I wasn't in office during Governor O'Malley's time. Would have been nice, but.
I did know the answer.
I see no other lights, no questions. Thank you, Senator Lamb. Thank you for this bill. Colleagues, we are done for the day. Let's just, can we stop the